Some discoveries are so strange, so unsettling, that they seem to belong more to legend than to history. Across the world, archaeologists have unearthed forgotten chambers, impossible artifacts, and eerie remnants of vanished cultures that continue to defy explanation. Beneath layers of stone, sand, and time lie mysteries that raise disturbing questions about humanity's distant past. What secrets were buried, and why have they remained hidden for so long? Join us as we uncover the 22 most outlandish and horrifying archaeological mysteries in history. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the unknown. On a sunlit hill rising above the plains of southeastern Spain, the ancient settlement of Cabezo Redondo appears almost unremarkable at first glance. The landscape is dry and rugged, shaped by centuries of wind and heat. Low stone walls emerge from the earth like fragments of a forgotten memory. From a distance, it is easy to overlook. Yet beneath these stones lies the story of one of the most important Bronze Age communities ever discovered on the Iberian Peninsula. Occupied roughly between 1500 and 1200 BC, Cabezo Redondo stood during a period when societies across the Mediterranean were becoming increasingly connected through trade, technology, and cultural exchange. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a thriving settlement, complete with houses, storage facilities, workshops, and sophisticated systems for managing resources. The people who lived here were not isolated villagers struggling to survive. They were skilled metalworkers, traders, and builders who participated in a much larger world. Excavations have revealed an impressive collection of artifacts. Bronze tools and weapons, finely crafted pottery, decorative objects, and evidence of textile production suggest a prosperous community. Particularly striking are the large storage areas discovered within the settlement. These structures indicate the accumulation of significant food reserves and valuable goods, hinting at an organized society capable of planning for the future. Yet the more researchers learn about Cabezo Redondo, the more intriguing the site becomes. One of the most remarkable discoveries was a hidden treasure consisting of gold, silver, and other valuable objects. Known as the Treasure of Villena, found only a short distance from the settlement, it ranks among the most important Bronze Age hoards ever discovered in Europe. The treasure raises immediate questions. Who possessed such extraordinary wealth? Was it controlled by local elites, powerful rulers, or influential merchants? And why was it buried? Some scholars suggest it may have been hidden during a time of conflict or instability. Others believe it could have served a ceremonial purpose, perhaps as an offering intended for forces beyond human understanding. The true reason remains uncertain. The settlement itself presents additional mysteries. Evidence suggests that Cabezo Redondo was abruptly abandoned around the end of the Bronze Age. Archaeologists have proposed several explanations. Environmental changes may have reduced agricultural productivity. Competition for resources could have led to conflict. Broader disruptions affecting Bronze Age societies across the Mediterranean may have reached this community as well. But the exact sequence of events remains difficult to reconstruct. Why would a prosperous settlement, strategically positioned and rich in resources, suddenly disappear from history? Some researchers point to evidence of social transformation occurring throughout the region. Trade networks that had connected distant cultures may have begun to break down. Political structures may have weakened. Long-established ways of life could have become unsustainable. In this view, Cabezo Redondo was not an isolated victim, but part of a much larger pattern of collapse that affected many ancient societies. Yet more speculative theories continue to circulate. A few independent researchers have noted the settlement's apparent complexity and wealth, arguing that traditional explanations may underestimate its importance. Could Cabezo Redondo have been a regional center exercising influence far beyond what archaeology currently recognizes? Did its leaders possess knowledge, technologies, or connections that have left only faint traces in the archaeological record? Others focus on the treasure itself. The extraordinary craftsmanship of certain objects has inspired questions about where the metals originated and how extensive the trade routes may have been. Some have even suggested that undiscovered networks linked distant cultures in ways that historians are only beginning to understand. Of course, no evidence supports more extraordinary claims involving lost civilizations or forgotten advanced technologies. Still, the unanswered questions remain compelling. Archaeology often reveals only fragments of a story, leaving vast spaces between the facts where uncertainty lingers. Today, the ruins of Cabezo Redondo sit quietly beneath the Spanish sky. The voices of its inhabitants are long gone, their beliefs and ambitions preserved only through scattered artifacts and weathered stone. Each excavation uncovers new details, yet the larger picture remains incomplete. What truly happened here in the final years of the settlement? Why was such wealth gathered, and why was it hidden? And beneath the layers of earth that still cover parts of the ancient hill, what discoveries might yet reshape our understanding of this forgotten Bronze Age world? While the story of Cabezo Redondo leaves us wondering about vanished wealth and forgotten societies, its mysteries belong to a relatively recent chapter of human history. To encounter an even deeper puzzle, we must travel much farther back in time, thousands of years before the Bronze Age, to a place where some of humanity's earliest experiments with settled life began. In the vast and arid plains of present-day Balochistan, Pakistan, a series of low, dusty mounds rises gently from the landscape. At first glance, there is little to suggest that this quiet terrain once witnessed one of the most important turning points in human history. Yet beneath these layers of earth lies Mehrgarh, an ancient settlement whose origins stretch back to around 7000 BC, making it one of the oldest known farming communities ever discovered in South Asia. The surrounding environment is stark and unforgiving. Mountains loom in the distance, while dry winds sweep across the plains. Today, the site appears silent and abandoned. But thousands of years ago, this landscape was alive with activity. Families built mud brick homes, cultivated crops, herded animals, and laid the foundations for a new way of life. What makes Mehrgarh so remarkable is not merely its age, but the sophistication it achieved at such an early date. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of organized agriculture, domesticated animals, storage facilities, craft production, and long-distance trade. The people of Mehrgarh were growing wheat and barley, raising livestock, and producing ornaments from materials obtained hundreds of miles away. This level of organization challenges older assumptions about how slowly human societies developed after the end of the Ice Age. The discoveries become even more intriguing when researchers examine the site's medical evidence. Among the most famous finds are human teeth showing signs of deliberate drilling. These procedures appear to have been performed nearly 9,000 years ago, long before the rise of many famous ancient civilizations. Tiny holes, carefully bored into molars using stone tools, suggest an early form of dentistry. How did people living in such a distant era acquire this knowledge? Was it the result of centuries of experimentation, passed from one generation to another? Or does it hint at a level of practical understanding that modern observers often underestimate? As excavations continued, archaeologists uncovered thousands of artifacts, including figurines, tools, jewelry, and burial goods. Some graves contained carefully arranged objects, suggesting that the inhabitants possessed complex beliefs about death and the afterlife. Yet no written records survive to explain what those beliefs were. This absence of writing creates one of Mehrgarh's greatest mysteries. Unlike later civilizations, the people who lived here left no known texts, no king's inscriptions, and no monuments describing their achievements. Everything we know comes from fragments, broken pottery, buried structures, scattered bones, and traces preserved beneath layers of soil. The physical evidence tells us that something extraordinary was happening here, but it cannot fully explain why. Many scholars view Mehrgarh as a precursor to the later Indus Valley civilization, one of the ancient world's most sophisticated urban cultures. Similarities in agriculture, crafts, and settlement patterns suggest a possible connection. Yet the exact relationship remains unclear. Did Mehrgarh gradually evolve into the societies that would later build great cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro? Or was the transition more complex, involving migrations, cultural exchanges, and transformations that remain hidden from view? Some researchers have noted how unexpectedly advanced certain aspects of Mehrgarh appear for such an early period. The speed with which farming, architecture, and specialized crafts emerged has sparked ongoing debate. Traditional explanations point to gradual development over many generations. Others wonder whether ancient networks of knowledge spread farther and faster than previously believed. More speculative theories occasionally push the discussion even further. Some suggest that important chapters of early human history may still be missing from the archaeological record, hidden beneath unexplored regions, or erased by the passage of millennia. If entire settlements remain undiscovered, could our current understanding of how civilization began be incomplete? The challenge is that Mehrgarh exists at the edge of recorded history, in a time when evidence becomes increasingly scarce. Every discovery illuminates one small corner of the past while casting new shadows elsewhere. Today, the ancient settlement rests quietly beneath the desert sun, its secrets buried beneath layers accumulated over thousands of years. Archaeologists continue to study its remains, piecing together fragments of a story that may never be fully reconstructed. Was Mehrgarh simply one of humanity's earliest successful farming communities, or was it part of a larger and more complex chapter of prehistory that has largely vanished from memory? And beneath the untouched ground that still surrounds the site, what forgotten clues might be waiting to challenge everything we think we know about the origins of civilization? From the sun-baked plains of Mehrgarh, where some of humanity's earliest communities began shaping the future, we now travel thousands of miles northwest to a very different landscape. Here, amid the rolling hills and mist-covered valleys of the Scottish Highlands, another mystery waits in silence. One not centered on the beginnings of civilization, but on humanity's enduring relationship with death, memory, and the cosmos. Near the city of Inverness, surrounded by green fields and ancient woodlands, stands a remarkable group of prehistoric monuments known as Clava Cairns. The site is quiet, almost deceptively so. Circular stone structures rise from the earth, their weathered surfaces marked by thousands of years of wind, rain, and changing seasons. Massive standing stones encircle burial chambers, casting long shadows across the grass as the sun moves overhead. At first glance, Clava Cairns appears to be a place of remembrance, a sacred landscape created to honor the dead. Yet the more closely archaeologists examine these ancient monuments, the more questions emerge. The cairns were constructed around 2000 BC during the Bronze Age. They consist of passage graves and ring cairns, carefully built using large stones transported and arranged with considerable effort. The builders left behind no written records, no inscriptions, and no explanation of their intentions. What survives are the stones themselves, standing as silent witnesses to a world that vanished long ago. One of the first mysteries lies in the site's extraordinary design. The passage graves are aligned with remarkable precision toward the setting sun during the winter solstice. On the shortest days of the year, sunlight enters specific chambers in a carefully orchestrated display of light and shadow. This alignment was clearly intentional. The builders understood the movement of the heavens and incorporated that knowledge into the architecture itself. But why? Many archaeologists believe the alignment reflected spiritual beliefs concerning death and rebirth. As the sun reached its lowest point before beginning its return, it may have symbolized renewal, transformation, or the continuation of existence beyond death. In this interpretation, Clava Cairns functioned as both a burial ground and a ceremonial landscape linked to cosmic cycles. Yet this explanation raises further questions. How did a society without modern instruments achieve such precise astronomical alignments? How many generations of observation were required to track the sun's movements so accurately? And why was this knowledge devoted to monuments associated with the dead? The stones themselves add another layer of intrigue. Researchers have observed deliberate patterns in the selection and placement of certain rocks. Red stones often appear on one side of a monument, while lighter stones occupy another. These choices may have held symbolic meaning. Perhaps they represented life and death, day and night, or concepts now lost to history. Whatever the purpose, the arrangement suggests a level of planning that extends far beyond simple construction. Excavations have revealed evidence of cremated human remains within some of the cairns, yet relatively few burials have been found compared to the scale of the monuments. This discrepancy has led some scholars to wonder whether the site served functions beyond burial alone. Was it a gathering place for ceremonies? A center for seasonal rituals? A location where communities reinforced social bonds through shared traditions? No definitive answer has emerged. As often happens with ancient monuments, the uncertainty surrounding Clava Cairns has inspired more speculative interpretations. Some researchers outside the academic mainstream have pointed to the site's astronomical alignments and geometric precision as evidence of forgotten knowledge systems. Others suggest that ancient people may have viewed certain landscapes as possessing unique spiritual qualities, leading them to construct monuments at locations considered sacred long before the cairns themselves existed. Local folklore adds its own layer of mystery. For centuries, stories have connected ancient stone circles and burial sites throughout Scotland with supernatural beings, hidden worlds, and unexplained forces. While these legends developed thousands of years after Clava Cairns was built, they reveal something important. Even later generations sensed that these monuments held meanings that had been lost. Standing among the stones today, it is easy to understand why. The silence feels different here. The carefully placed circles, the narrow passages, and the immense age of the site create an atmosphere that is difficult to define. The monuments seem less like ruins and more like messages written in a language no longer understood. Perhaps Clava Cairns was simply a burial complex designed by skilled Bronze Age builders with a deep understanding of astronomy. Or perhaps it represented a far more complex worldview, one in which the boundaries between the living, the dead, and the cosmos were woven together in ways we can only partially reconstruct. And if so much meaning could survive in stone for 4,000 years while its purpose faded into obscurity, what other knowledge might have disappeared entirely? What were the builders truly trying to communicate to the future? And are we still missing the most important part of the message? If Clava Cairns leaves us contemplating ancient messages carved into stone and aligned with the heavens, our journey now moves south toward a landscape shaped by cliffs, winds, and centuries of forgotten history. There, perched high above the rugged countryside of Andalusia, another archaeological mystery waits in silence, a city that once thrived, then faded, leaving behind questions that have never been fully answered. The ruins of Acinipo stand atop a broad limestone plateau in southern Spain, overlooking rolling hills and deep valleys that stretch toward the horizon. From this elevated position, the ancient settlement commands a breathtaking view of the surrounding landscape. Even today, the location feels strategic, almost timeless. The wind moves across the plateau with little resistance, carrying a silence broken only by distant birds and the rustle of grass among the stones. At the heart of the site lies its most striking feature, a remarkably preserved Roman theater carved directly into the bedrock. Rows of stone seats still face the stage after nearly 2,000 years. Standing there, it is easy to imagine crowds gathering beneath the open sky, watching performances, political speeches, or ceremonies that once brought life to this isolated hilltop city. Yet Acinipo's story begins long before the arrival of Rome. Archaeological evidence suggests that people occupied this region for centuries before the Roman era. Indigenous communities recognized the value of the plateau, drawn by its natural defenses, fertile surroundings, and access to important trade routes. Over time, the settlement grew into a significant urban center. By the Roman period, Acinipo had become prosperous enough to mint its own coins and construct impressive public buildings. For a time, the city flourished, and then, gradually, it disappeared. The mystery of Acinipo is not that it existed, but why such a well-positioned and successful settlement eventually declined and was abandoned. Historians have proposed several explanations. Changes in trade routes may have weakened its economic importance. Political instability during the later Roman Empire could have disrupted regional networks. Environmental pressures, including water shortages, may have made life increasingly difficult. These theories are plausible, yet none fully explain every aspect of the city's fate. Why would a settlement occupying such a commanding location lose its significance so completely? Why did later populations choose not to restore it to its former prominence? Part of the intrigue comes from Acinipo's unusual setting. Unlike many Roman cities built beside major rivers or along coastlines, this city occupied a remote plateau. Maintaining a large urban population here would have required careful management of resources, particularly water. Archaeologists have identified reservoirs and infrastructure designed to support daily life, but questions remain about how sustainable the settlement truly was over long periods. The ruins themselves offer only fragments of the answer. Broken walls, foundations, and scattered artifacts reveal pieces of a once complex community, yet much of the city's history remains buried beneath the earth. Excavations continue to uncover new details, occasionally raising as many questions as they resolve. Adding to the mystery are the legends that have accumulated around the site over the centuries. Local traditions sometimes describe the plateau as a place touched by unusual events and forgotten histories. Stories of hidden chambers, lost treasures, and buried secrets have circulated for generations. While there is little archaeological evidence supporting such claims, the persistence of these tales reflects a deeper fascination with places that seem suspended between past and present. Some researchers have also noted how Acinipo appears to occupy a symbolic position within the landscape. Its elevated location provides sweeping views in every direction, creating a sense that the city was meant to be seen as much as inhabited. Was this purely practical, or did the site's builders attribute deeper meaning to its position above the surrounding world? More speculative theories occasionally suggest that Acinipo's true significance may have extended beyond economics or military strategy. Perhaps it functioned as a ceremonial center, a place where political power, religion, and identity converged. If so, much of that purpose may have vanished alongside the culture that created it. Like many ancient sites, Acinipo forces us to confront the limits of the archaeological record. Stone can survive for millennia, but intentions, beliefs, and motivations often disappear. The theater remains, the streets remain, the foundations remain. Yet the voices of those who built them are gone. Today, visitors walk among the ruins under the same sky that watched over generations of inhabitants. The plateau still offers its panoramic view, and the ancient theater still faces the horizon as though awaiting an audience that never arrived. Was Acinipo simply another city overtaken by changing times, or does its abandonment conceal a more complex story that has yet to be uncovered? And beneath the untouched layers of earth that still surround the ruins, what forgotten chapters of its history remain hidden, waiting for someone to ask the right question? While Acinipo invites us to wonder how a thriving city could gradually fade into silence, its story unfolds within a relatively familiar chapter of the ancient world. To encounter a deeper and more enigmatic mystery, we must travel much farther back in time, beyond the Roman era, beyond recorded empires, and into the dawn of urban civilization itself. There, amid the broad plains of northern Mesopotamia, an enormous mound rises from the landscape, concealing the remains of a city that may have helped shape the very idea of what a city could be. Known today as Tel Brak, the site appears as a vast earthen hill emerging from the flat terrain of northeastern Syria. At first glance, it resembles little more than a natural rise in the land. Yet beneath its dusty surface lie thousands of years of human history layered one upon another. Generation after generation built homes, temples, streets, and public spaces atop the remains of those who came before, slowly creating the massive mound visible today. The scale of Tel Brak is immediately striking. Archaeological evidence suggests that by around 4000 BC, the settlement had grown into one of the largest urban centers in the ancient Near East. This is particularly significant because it challenges long-held assumptions about the origins of cities. For decades, scholars believed that the first true cities emerged primarily in southern Mesopotamia. Yet Tel Brak appears to have developed into a major urban center independently, raising fundamental questions about how civilization itself evolved. How did a settlement in this region expand so rapidly? What forces drew thousands of people together into one place at such an early date? The answers remain incomplete. Excavations have revealed evidence of large public buildings, workshops, administrative structures, and extensive trade networks. Artifacts discovered at the site suggest connections stretching across vast distances. Materials, ideas, and technologies flowed through Tel Brak, linking it to communities far beyond the horizon. Yet among these discoveries, one stands apart from all others. Archaeologists uncovered an area now known as the Eye Temple, named after the thousands of small stone figurines found within it. These objects are unlike anything most people imagine when thinking of ancient religious artifacts. Each figurine features a simplified human form dominated by enormous eyes. Some are small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Others are larger and more elaborate. Thousands of them were deliberately deposited within the temple over generations. Why eyes? What did these figures represent? The mainstream interpretation is that they were devotional offerings, perhaps symbolizing worshippers presenting themselves before a deity. Their oversized eyes may have represented attentiveness, vigilance, or spiritual awareness. Yet certainty remains elusive. The sheer number of figurines and the consistency of their design have inspired countless questions. Why was this particular symbol so important? What beliefs motivated people to create and leave behind such vast quantities of these unusual objects? Even today, rows of staring stone eyes seem strangely unsettling, as though they were intended to communicate something that modern observers can no longer understand. Another mystery emerged from excavations outside the city's center. Archaeologists discovered evidence of what appears to have been large-scale violence dating back more than 5,000 years. Human remains, scattered across certain areas of the site, suggest episodes of conflict during Tel Brak's expansion. Some researchers have proposed that early urban growth may have generated social tensions, competition for resources, or organized warfare. If so, Tel Brak may offer one of the earliest glimpses of the challenges that accompanied the rise of complex societies. But many details remain uncertain. Were these remains evidence of warfare, political unrest, or something else entirely? How were these events connected to the city's development? The archaeological record provides clues, but not complete answers. As often happens with sites of such immense antiquity, more speculative theories have emerged alongside academic interpretations. Some independent researchers have pointed to Tel Brak's unexpected scale and sophistication as evidence that our understanding of early civilization may still be incomplete. They argue that significant chapters of humanity's urban origins remain hidden beneath unexplored layers of earth throughout the region. Others focus on the Eye Temple itself. The unusual figurines, repeated in such extraordinary numbers, have inspired suggestions that they encoded symbolic knowledge now lost to time. While no evidence supports more extraordinary claims, the mystery surrounding their purpose continues to fascinate both scholars and visitors alike. The deeper archaeologists dig into Tel Brak, the more complex the picture becomes. Rather than revealing a simple origin story for civilization, the site presents a mosaic of innovation, belief, conflict, and adaptation stretching across millennia. Today, the Great Mound still rises above the plain, its secrets preserved beneath layers of dust and stone. Every excavation uncovers new fragments of the past, yet the people who built this ancient city remain frustratingly distant. Their temples survive. Their artifacts survive. Their influence may even survive in the very concept of urban life itself. But why did they choose this place? What meanings lay behind the countless staring eyes of the temple? And beneath the unexplored portions of the mound, what forgotten chapters of humanity's earliest cities are still waiting to be discovered? While Tel Brak challenges our understanding of how the world's earliest cities emerged, its mysteries are rooted in the fertile plains of ancient Mesopotamia. Our next destination takes us thousands of miles to the south, into a very different landscape. Here, among the rolling hills and open grasslands near Lake Victoria in western Kenya, stands a monument that has puzzled generations of visitors and researchers alike. A vast stone complex whose origins, purpose, and builders remained subjects of speculation for centuries. From above, the ruins of Thimlich Ohinga appear almost like a maze etched into the earth. Massive dry stone walls curve across the landscape in concentric patterns, forming a network of enclosures that seem both practical and symbolic. The stones, some weighing hundreds of pounds, were stacked without mortar, yet many of the walls have endured for centuries. Time has weathered their surfaces, but the structures remain remarkably resilient, standing against wind, rain, and the passage of generations. The setting itself feels timeless. The surrounding countryside stretches toward the horizon in shades of green and gold. Acacia trees dot the landscape, and distant hills rise gently beneath the African sky. At first glance, the site appears isolated, yet its scale immediately suggests that this was once a place of great importance. The name Thimlich Ohinga roughly translates to frightening dense forest in the local Luo language, a reminder of how the region may have appeared long ago. By the time European explorers and colonial-era researchers encountered the ruins, the origins of the site had become obscured by time. The immense stone walls seemed out of place, leading some outsiders to assume that they must have been built by a lost civilization or by visitors from distant lands. Such assumptions reflected a broader pattern in early archaeology. For many years, some researchers struggled to accept that large-scale stone architecture in Africa could have been constructed by local communities. As a result, speculative theories emerged linking the site to outsiders ranging from ancient traders to entirely hypothetical civilizations. Modern archaeological evidence tells a different story. Research strongly indicates that Thimlich Ohinga was built by local Bantu-speaking communities, likely between the 15th and 16th centuries, though some parts of the tradition may be older. The builders possessed sophisticated knowledge of stone construction and landscape management. They carefully selected and arranged thousands of stones to create defensive enclosures capable of protecting both people and livestock. Yet even with this understanding, many questions remain. Why was such an enormous effort invested in constructing these walls? What threats required defenses on this scale? And why do similar stone enclosures appear across portions of the surrounding region? The mainstream explanation focuses on security. During periods of migration, competition for resources, and shifting political alliances, fortified settlements would have provided protection against raids and conflicts. The walls may also have served to safeguard valuable livestock, a crucial source of wealth and status. But the complexity of the site suggests that defense alone may not tell the entire story. Within the enclosures, archaeologists have found evidence of long-term habitation. These were not merely fortresses occupied during emergencies. They were living spaces where families worked, traded, and maintained social traditions. The layout appears carefully organized, reflecting a community that understood both practical needs and social structure. Some researchers have suggested that the walls may also have carried symbolic significance. In many societies, architecture serves multiple purposes at once. A wall can provide protection while simultaneously expressing identity, authority, or spiritual meaning. Could the concentric enclosures of Thimlich Ohinga have communicated messages understood by those who lived within them but lost to history today? The site's construction methods add another layer of intrigue. The stones were assembled without mortar, relying instead on careful placement and engineering. The builders created structures capable of surviving for centuries using techniques passed down through generations. Yet because the societies responsible left few written records, much of their knowledge must be reconstructed indirectly through archaeology. This absence of written testimony creates fertile ground for mystery. Who organized the labor required to build such a complex? Were the walls expanded gradually over decades, or constructed according to a larger vision from the beginning? How much knowledge has disappeared alongside the communities that once inhabited the site? As with many ancient monuments, more speculative interpretations occasionally emerge. Some independent researchers point to the impressive scale of the construction and suggest that important chapters of East African history remain underappreciated or poorly understood. Others argue that sites like Thimlich Ohinga challenge long-standing assumptions about the development of complex societies and monumental architecture. While evidence supports local origins for the site, the broader story of how these traditions evolved remains incomplete. Archaeology continues to uncover new clues, but large portions of the past remain hidden beneath layers of time. Standing among the stone walls today, it is difficult not to feel a sense of distance from the people who built them. The passages curve unexpectedly. The enclosures open into spaces that once echoed with conversation, work, and daily life. The stones remain exactly where they were placed centuries ago, yet the world that created them has largely vanished. Perhaps Thimlich Ohinga was primarily a fortified settlement, built to protect communities during uncertain times. Or perhaps the walls embodied meanings that extended beyond defense, ideas about belonging, identity, power, and memory that can no longer be fully recovered. And if these silent stones still hold stories that archaeology has yet to uncover, what other forgotten chapters of Africa's past remain hidden beyond the reach of written history, waiting beneath the soil for someone to piece them together once again? If the stone walls of Thimlich Ohinga remind us how much history can survive without written records, our next destination presents a different kind of puzzle. Here, too, ancient builders left behind remarkable architecture and enduring questions. But instead of the green landscapes near Lake Victoria, we travel across oceans and continents to the rugged canyon country of the American Southwest, where silent towers rise from the desert like sentinels guarding forgotten secrets. The land of Hovenweep is a place of extremes. Stretching across the borderlands of present-day Utah and Colorado, the landscape is carved by centuries of wind, water, and time. Deep canyons cut through sandstone plateaus. Sparse vegetation clings to the dry earth. During the day, sunlight paints the rocks in shades of red, gold, and amber. At night, the darkness reveals a sky crowded with stars, much as it would have appeared hundreds of years ago. Scattered throughout this harsh environment stand the ruins of Hovenweep, an extraordinary collection of towers, dwellings, ceremonial structures, and defensive-looking buildings constructed by the ancestral Puebloan people between roughly AD 1200 and 1300. At first glance, the towers seem almost impossible. Some stand balanced on the edges of cliffs. Others are positioned atop large boulders or perched along canyon rims. Built from carefully shaped stones, many remain remarkably intact despite centuries of exposure to the elements. Their walls are straight, their corners precise, and their placement often appears deliberate to a degree that still impresses modern engineers. Who built these structures, and why were they placed in such unusual locations? Archaeologists have learned a great deal about the people who lived here. The ancestral Puebloans developed sophisticated farming techniques, cultivated crops in difficult environments, and constructed settlements throughout the Southwest. They possessed extensive knowledge of architecture, astronomy, and resource management. Far from being isolated groups struggling to survive, they were part of a vibrant cultural network connected through trade, shared traditions, and communication. Yet Hovenweep remains distinctive even among the many remarkable sites left behind by these ancient communities. The towers are perhaps the greatest mystery. Some researchers believe they served defensive purposes. Their elevated positions would have provided excellent views of the surrounding landscape, allowing inhabitants to monitor movement across the canyons. During periods of conflict or social tension, such vantage points could have been invaluable. Others suggest that defense was only one aspect of their function. Certain towers contain features that appear poorly suited for military use. Some include unusual openings, carefully placed windows, and alignments that seem to correspond with celestial events. Studies have suggested that sunlight and shadows interact with portions of the architecture during solstices and equinoxes. If these observations are correct, at least some structures may have served astronomical or ceremonial roles. This possibility transforms the ruins into something far more complex. Were the tower's observation points used to track the passage of seasons? Did they help regulate agricultural activities by marking important moments in the solar year? Or were they connected to spiritual practices that modern archaeology can only partially reconstruct? The answers remain uncertain. Adding to the intrigue is the question of why Hovenweep was built in such a demanding environment. Life in this region required careful management of water, food, and resources. The inhabitants developed ingenious systems for capturing and conserving rainfall. They adapted to a landscape that offered both opportunities and challenges. For a time, these efforts were remarkably successful. Then, sometime during the late 13th century, the settlements were largely abandoned. This pattern echoes one of the great mysteries of the ancient Southwest. Across the region, numerous ancestral Puebloan communities experienced significant population movements during this period. Scholars have proposed several explanations. Extended droughts may have reduced agricultural productivity. Resource pressures could have intensified competition between communities. Social, political, or religious changes may also have played important roles. None of these explanations, however, fully resolves every question. Why invest so much effort in constructing these impressive towers only to leave them behind within a relatively short span of time? Why did entire communities relocate from places where generations had lived and worked? The silence of Hovenweep offers few clues. As with many archaeological mysteries, speculative theories have emerged alongside mainstream interpretations. Some independent researchers have suggested that the towers encoded sophisticated astronomical knowledge not yet fully understood. Others point to their unusual shapes and placements as evidence that certain functions remain undiscovered. A few have even argued that the site's true significance may have extended far beyond what current archaeology recognizes. While extraordinary claims often exceed the available evidence, they reflect a genuine reality. Many aspects of Hovenweep remain uncertain. The site also possesses an atmosphere that visitors frequently describe as difficult to explain. Perhaps it is the isolation of the landscape. Perhaps it is the contrast between the elaborate stonework and the emptiness that surrounds it. Or perhaps it is the awareness that entire communities once filled these canyons with activity, conversation, ceremony, and daily life, only to vanish from the region centuries ago. Walking among the towers today, one encounters architecture that feels both familiar and mysterious. The stones reveal remarkable skill, yet they conceal the motivations of the people who arranged them. Every doorway, every window, every carefully placed block seems to hint at meanings that have not entirely survived. The ancestral Puebloans left no written records explaining the purpose of these structures. What remains are fragments, walls, artifacts, alignments, and landscapes shaped by human hands. Archaeologists continue to study them, uncovering new details while confronting new uncertainties. Perhaps Hovenweep was primarily a network of farming communities adapting to a challenging environment. Perhaps the towers served practical, ceremonial, and astronomical functions simultaneously. Or perhaps some element of their purpose has yet to be recognized altogether. And as the desert wind moves through the ruins beneath a sky filled with the same stars their builders once observed, one question continues to linger. What knowledge guided the construction of these extraordinary towers, and how much of that knowledge disappeared when the people of Hovenweep quietly walked away from the canyons they had called home? If Hovenweep leaves us contemplating silent towers beneath the vast skies of the American Southwest, our journey now returns to Africa, where another stone-built mystery rises from the landscape. Like the walls of Thimlich Ohinga and the towers of Hovenweep, this site speaks through architecture rather than written words. Yet its story unfolds on an even grander scale, one connected to kings, trade networks, and a civilization whose achievements were long misunderstood by outsiders. In the dry woodlands of southwestern Zimbabwe, not far from the modern city of Bulawayo, the ruins of Khami emerge from the earth in a series of elevated stone terraces. The landscape is both beautiful and austere. Granite outcrops break through the soil. Ancient trees cast shifting shadows across the ground. During the golden hours of sunrise and sunset, the stone walls seem to glow with an almost unreal warmth, as though they are holding on to fragments of another age. At first glance, Khami appears less like a ruined city and more like a carefully sculpted landscape. Massive retaining walls curve gracefully around hillsides, forming platforms that rise above the surrounding terrain. Unlike many ancient stone structures, these walls were not built primarily for defense. Instead, they seem designed to organize space, create impressive visual effects, and elevate important areas above the ordinary world below. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Thousands of stones were carefully stacked without mortar, fitted together with remarkable precision. Decorative patterns were incorporated directly into the masonry, creating geometric designs that remain visible centuries later. The builders understood not only engineering but aesthetics. Their architecture was functional, symbolic, and beautiful all at once. Khami flourished between approximately the 15th and 17th centuries, following the decline of Great Zimbabwe, one of Africa's most famous archaeological sites. Historians generally identify Khami as the capital of the Kingdom of Butua, a powerful state that controlled trade routes linking the interior of southern Africa to coastal networks connected with the Indian Ocean world. Archaeological discoveries reveal a society that was deeply connected to distant regions. Excavations have uncovered imported ceramics, glass beads, and other luxury goods originating from far beyond southern Africa. These objects testify to commercial relationships stretching across continents. Merchants exchanged gold, ivory, and other valuable resources for goods arriving from distant ports. Khami was not isolated. It was part of a global network long before the modern era. Yet despite this growing understanding, many aspects of the site remain enigmatic. One of the most intriguing mysteries involves the organization of the city itself. The elevated terraces appear to have been associated with elites, while lower areas housed larger segments of the population. This arrangement suggests a highly structured society with clearly defined social distinctions. But how exactly was power exercised here? What political systems governed daily life? How were decisions made, conflicts resolved, and authority maintained? The stones remain silent. Unlike some civilizations that left extensive written records, the inhabitants of Khami communicated their achievements primarily through architecture, material culture, and oral traditions. As a result, modern researchers must reconstruct the past from fragments. Every artifact provides clues, but many details remain frustratingly out of reach. The mystery deepens when considering the broader history of the region. For centuries, some foreign observers struggled to accept that monumental stone architecture in southern Africa could have been built by local African societies. As a result, speculative claims emerged attributing sites such as Khami and Great Zimbabwe to outsiders from distant civilizations. Various theories proposed builders from the Mediterranean, the Middle East, or elsewhere. Modern archaeology has overwhelmingly rejected these interpretations. The evidence strongly supports indigenous origins and demonstrates the extraordinary capabilities of the societies that constructed these monuments. Yet even after dismissing outdated misconceptions, important questions remain. Why did Khami develop its distinctive architectural style? Why were elevated terraces favored over the massive enclosed walls seen at Great Zimbabwe? Were these differences purely practical, or did they reflect changing beliefs about authority, status, and sacred space? Some researchers suggest that the architecture itself may have served as a form of communication. The placement of structures, the arrangement of terraces, and the decorative stonework could have conveyed social meanings immediately understood by those who lived there. If so, much of that symbolic language has been lost. The site's decline presents another enduring puzzle. By the late 17th century, Khami had largely ceased functioning as a major political center. Historians point to several possible causes. Shifts in regional trade networks may have weakened its economic foundation. Political rivalries and succession struggles could have destabilized the kingdom. Environmental pressures may also have played a role. Each explanation contains elements of truth, yet none fully captures the complexity of what occurred. How does a city connected to international trade, supported by skilled builders, and serving as the heart of a powerful kingdom gradually lose its prominence? What changes unfolded within these terraces during the final years of occupation? As often happens with ancient ruins, uncertainty creates space for speculation. Some independent researchers argue that much of southern Africa's pre-colonial history remains underexplored, and that sites such as Khami may hold clues to social and political developments that have yet to be fully understood. Others focus on the remarkable sophistication of the stonework itself, wondering whether additional undiscovered structures lie hidden beneath layers of vegetation and soil. There are also lingering questions about ceremonial practices. Certain elevated areas may have served ritual functions, but the details remain unclear. What ceremonies took place here? What beliefs shaped the lives of the people who gathered within these spaces? How did they understand their relationship to the land, their ancestors, and the wider world? Standing among the ruins today, it is difficult not to feel the weight of these unanswered questions. The terraces rise quietly above the landscape, their stone walls enduring long after the kingdom that built them disappeared. Birds nest among the ruins. Trees grow where royal compounds once stood. The sounds of everyday life have been replaced by wind moving through the grass. Yet the architecture continues to convey a sense of purpose. Every carefully placed stone suggests planning, intention, and meaning. The builders clearly understood something about their world that they sought to express through these enduring forms. Perhaps Khami was simply the political and economic center of a successful kingdom whose fortunes eventually changed with time. Or perhaps the terraces preserve deeper stories, stories about power, identity, belief, and knowledge that archaeology has only begun to uncover. And as researchers continue to study the site, one question remains suspended over the silent stone platforms. How much of Khami's true history is still hidden beneath the earth, waiting for future discoveries to reveal a civilization far more complex than we currently imagine? If the stone terraces of Khami invite us to consider how power, trade, and belief could be expressed through architecture, our next destination takes us into a landscape where history and legend seem almost impossible to separate. Here, ancient ruins stand beside a mysterious lake, surrounded by stories of kings, sacred fires, hidden treasures, and supernatural forces. It is a place where archaeology provides answers, yet somehow leaves the most intriguing questions unresolved. High in the mountains of northwestern Iran, surrounded by rolling volcanic terrain and broad valleys, lies Takht-e Soleyman, the throne of Solomon. Even before reaching the ruins themselves, the setting feels unusual. The landscape is dramatic but quiet, shaped by geological forces that have been active for countless ages. In the center of a vast stone enclosure sits a deep, perfectly still lake, whose dark waters seem almost unreal. The lake is the heart of the mystery. Fed by a powerful underground spring, it fills a natural volcanic crater approximately 100 meters across. The water emerges from deep beneath the earth and maintains a nearly constant level throughout the year. Its surface often appears calm and reflective, like polished glass. Yet beneath that tranquil appearance lies extraordinary depth. No one knows its exact depth with complete certainty. Modern measurements suggest the lake descends far below the visible surface, reaching depths that make exploration difficult. For centuries, local legends claimed the waters were bottomless. Others believed treasures, weapons, and sacred objects had been cast into the lake, disappearing forever into the darkness below. Standing at its edge, it is easy to understand how such stories emerged. The ruins surrounding the lake date primarily to the Sasanian Empire, one of the great powers of the ancient world. Between the 3rd and 7th centuries A.D., Takht-e Soleyman became one of the most important religious centers of Zoroastrianism. Here stood the sacred fire temple of Adur-Gushnasp, one of the faith's most revered sites. To the people who worshipped here, fire was not merely a practical tool. It represented purity, divine order, and the presence of sacred truth. Pilgrims and rulers traveled great distances to reach this place. Kings are believed to have visited before major campaigns, seeking spiritual legitimacy and divine favor. Yet despite its historical significance, the site remains wrapped in uncertainty. Why was this particular location chosen? The answer seems obvious at first. The crater lake is visually striking, and the surrounding landscape possesses a natural grandeur. But some researchers believe there may have been deeper reasons. Ancient cultures often viewed unusual geological features as places where the boundary between the earthly and spiritual worlds became thinner. Springs, caves, mountains, and volcanic formations frequently acquired sacred status. Takht-e Soleyman contains all of these elements. The result is a landscape that feels intentionally chosen, as though nature itself was part of the sanctuary. Archaeologists have uncovered temples, halls, fortifications, and ceremonial structures within the site's walls. Together, they reveal a highly organized religious complex. Yet many details of daily life remain obscure. What rituals unfolded beside the lake? How did pilgrims experience the sacred spaces? What meanings were attached to the waters emerging endlessly from the depths below? The written record provides some clues, but never a complete picture. The mysteries become even more fascinating when myth enters the story. Although the site's name links it to the biblical and Quranic figure Solomon, there is no archaeological evidence that Solomon himself was connected to the ruins. The association developed centuries later as local traditions sought to explain the extraordinary landscape. According to various legends, Solomon imprisoned demons within the surrounding mountains. Some stories claim supernatural beings helped construct structures in the area. Others suggest that powerful treasures or magical artifacts were hidden beneath the lake's surface. These tales are not historical evidence, yet they reveal something important. For generations, people looked upon Takht-e Soleyman and sensed that it was different from ordinary places. Even invading armies seem to have contributed to the mystery. In the 7th century, major political and religious changes transformed the region. Later centuries brought additional upheavals. Mongol rulers eventually occupied and modified portions of the site, adding new layers to an already complex history. Yet despite these transformations, the location never entirely lost its aura. One of the most enduring mysteries concerns what may still lie beneath the lake itself. Historical accounts describe offerings and valuables being deposited in the waters. Over centuries, countless objects may have disappeared into the depths. Modern investigations have recovered some materials, but the lake's conditions make exploration challenging. Could significant artifacts remain hidden below? It is certainly possible. Whether those objects would reveal dramatic new insights is another question entirely. Yet the possibility continues to capture the imagination of archaeologists and visitors alike. More speculative theories occasionally venture further. Some independent researchers argue that the site's sacred importance predates the Sasanian period by far more than currently recognized. Others suggest that ancient peoples may have attributed unusual properties to the spring itself, perhaps viewing it as evidence of forces emerging directly from beneath the earth. While such ideas remain difficult to verify, they reflect a broader reality. Takht-e Soleyman sits at the intersection of geology, religion, history, and legend. Each perspective explains part of the story, but none explains everything. The deeper researchers investigate, the more layers emerge. There is the geological mystery of the crater lake, the historical mystery of a sacred center that attracted rulers and pilgrims, the archaeological mystery of structures whose full functions remain uncertain, and the cultural mystery of legends that continue to surround the site centuries after its decline. Today, the ruins stand quietly around the dark waters, their stone walls weathered by time. The sacred fires have long since gone out. The pilgrims have vanished. The kingdoms that once competed for power across the region have faded into history. Yet the lake remains. Its waters continue to rise from unseen depths, just as they did when priests tended sacred flames along its shores. The surface reflects the sky, concealing whatever lies beneath. And as the wind moves across the ancient enclosure, one question lingers over the silent ruins. Was Takht-e Soleyman merely a remarkable religious center shaped by an extraordinary landscape? Or does the lake still conceal secrets that could transform our understanding of why this place became sacred in the first place? If Takht-e Soleyman leaves us staring into dark waters that seem to conceal centuries of sacred history, our next destination draws our eyes upward instead. High above a winding river valley, where clouds drift between mountain peaks and stone structures cling improbably to the landscape, another mystery awaits. Like the sacred lake of Iran, this place occupies a setting so dramatic that it is difficult to separate natural wonder from human achievement. In the heart of the Peruvian Andes, overlooking the fertile sacred valley of the Incas, the ruins of Pisac stretch across a rugged mountain ridge. Terraces cascade down steep slopes like giant stairways carved into the earth itself. Stone walls trace the contours of the mountainside. Narrow pathways wind through ancient structures perched hundreds of meters above the valley floor. From a distance, the entire complex seems less like a city and more like an extension of the mountain. The setting is breathtaking. Far below, the Urubamba River curves through the valley, nourishing fields that have supported human communities for generations. Above, Towering peaks rise into the mist. The air is thin, the views immense. Even today, reaching certain sections of Pisac requires a challenging climb, leaving many visitors with a simple question: why build such an elaborate settlement in a location so difficult to access? The mainstream historical explanation places Pisac within the expanding Inca Empire during the 15th century. The site is generally believed to have served multiple functions at once. It was likely a military outpost, an administrative center, an agricultural hub, and a ceremonial complex. Like many Inca sites, it reflects a sophisticated understanding of engineering, landscape management, and social organization. Yet Pisac remains one of the most intriguing examples of these achievements. Its agricultural terraces are among the most striking features of the site. Constructed along steep mountain slopes, they transformed challenging terrain into productive farmland. The terraces also helped control erosion, regulate water flow, and create microclimates suitable for different crops. The precision involved is remarkable. Each level was carefully engineered with layers of stone, gravel, sand, and soil. Together they formed a system capable of functioning for centuries. Modern engineers continue to study these methods, impressed by how effectively they adapted to the mountainous environment. But agriculture was only one part of the story. Scattered throughout Pisac are temples, ceremonial spaces, storage structures, and residential areas. Some buildings feature the finely cut stonework for which the Incas became famous. Massive stones fit together with extraordinary precision, often without mortar. In certain sections, gaps between stones are so narrow that even a thin blade can barely pass between them. How was such precision achieved? Archaeologists generally attribute it to skilled craftsmanship, patient labor, and generations of accumulated knowledge. Yet the exact techniques used remain a subject of ongoing study. The Incas left no written descriptions explaining their methods, forcing researchers to reconstruct the process through experimentation and observation. Among the most mysterious parts of Pisac are the structures associated with ceremonial and spiritual activities. The Incas viewed mountains as sacred entities, often believing that powerful spiritual forces resided within them. Certain locations within Pisac appear carefully positioned to interact with the surrounding landscape. Windows frame distant peaks. Pathways guide movement toward significant viewpoints. Architectural elements seem designed to emphasize relationships between the built environment and the natural world. Was this merely aesthetic, or was something deeper taking place? Many scholars believe Pisac functioned as a sacred landscape where astronomy, religion, and geography were closely intertwined. The positioning of structures may have reflected celestial observations or ceremonial practices tied to seasonal cycles. Some alignments appear particularly suggestive. Researchers have proposed that portions of the site were designed to track the movements of the sun during important points in the year. These observations would have been essential for agriculture, but they may also have carried spiritual significance. In many ancient societies, the heavens were not simply observed, they were woven into the fabric of daily life. Yet certainty remains elusive. The destruction and disruption that followed the Spanish conquest left many questions unanswered. Oral traditions were interrupted. Sacred practices changed or disappeared. Much of the cultural context needed to fully interpret the site was lost. As a result, Pisac often feels like a puzzle with many pieces missing. One of the most fascinating mysteries involves a section known for its carved stone formations and ceremonial structures. Some researchers suggest these spaces were used for rituals connected to ancestor worship, seasonal festivals, or communication with the spiritual realm. Others emphasize practical functions that may have become symbolically significant over time. The challenge is that the same architecture can support multiple interpretations. A ceremonial platform may also have served political purposes. An astronomical observation point may have been integrated into religious practices. A defensive structure may have communicated social authority. The boundaries between these categories were likely far less rigid than modern observers often assume. Beyond mainstream archaeology, Pisac has inspired more speculative theories. Its location, precision stonework, and dramatic setting have led some independent researchers to argue that aspects of Inca engineering remain poorly understood. Others suggest that the site may preserve astronomical knowledge that has yet to be fully decoded. While extraordinary claims frequently exceed the available evidence, they highlight an undeniable reality. Pisac continues to inspire wonder because so much about its deeper meanings remains uncertain. The mountain itself contributes to this sense of mystery. From certain vantage points, the terraces and structures seem to merge seamlessly with the landscape. The site appears neither entirely natural nor entirely artificial. Instead, it occupies a space somewhere between the two, reflecting a worldview in which humans sought harmony with the mountains rather than domination over them. Standing among the ruins today, surrounded by clouds and stone, it becomes easy to imagine how powerful this place must have felt centuries ago. The wind moves across the terraces, shadows drift across distant peaks. Ancient walls still trace the contours of the mountain exactly as their builders intended. The physical structures remain, but the full meaning behind them does not. Perhaps Pisac was primarily a strategic and agricultural center supporting the expansion of the Inca Empire. Perhaps it was also a sacred landscape where astronomy, spirituality, and governance converged in ways we only partially understand. Or perhaps some of its most important functions have left few traces in the archaeological record at all. And as the Andes continue to guard their secrets beneath shifting clouds and endless horizons, one question remains. Did the builders of Pisac leave behind a message encoded in stone and landscape, a message that modern archaeology has only begun to decipher? If Pisac leaves us wondering whether ancient builders encoded knowledge into mountains, terraces, and sacred landscapes, our next mystery takes us even farther back in time, to an age when some of humanity's earliest monument builders began reshaping the earth itself. Long before empires rose and fell, before written language emerged, and before the great civilizations of the ancient world appeared, a community on the windswept coast of northwestern France constructed a monument so old that it still challenges our understanding of prehistoric society. On a narrow peninsula overlooking the waters of the Bay of Morlaix in Brittany, a massive stone structure rises gently from the landscape. At first glance, Barnenez appears almost like a natural hill. Grass covers much of its surface. Sea winds sweep across its slopes. The monument blends so completely with its surroundings that it is easy to miss its true nature. Yet beneath that grassy exterior lies one of the oldest and most remarkable megalithic structures in Europe. Barnenez is a massive burial mound, or cairn, stretching more than 70 meters in length and containing multiple stone passage chambers hidden within its interior. Archaeologists estimate that the earliest portions of the monument were constructed around 4,800 BC, making it older than Stonehenge and older than the Egyptian pyramids by nearly 2,000 years. The age alone is astonishing. At a time when much of Europe was still transitioning toward settled agricultural life, the builders of Barnenez organized the labor, planning, and resources necessary to construct a monument on a scale rarely associated with such an early period. How did they accomplish this? The stones used in the structure weigh several tons in some cases. Many were transported from nearby outcrops and carefully arranged to create passageways, chambers, and supporting walls. The builders possessed no metal tools, no wheeled vehicles, and no written records. Yet the monument they created has survived for more than 6,000 years. The deeper archaeologists investigate Barnenez, the more complex the site becomes. Rather than being a single structure built all at once, the cairn appears to have been constructed in multiple phases. Different sections were added over time, expanding the monument and altering its appearance. This suggests that Barnenez remained important across generations, perhaps even centuries. Why continue enlarging it? One possibility is that the monument served as a collective burial site for an important community. Excavations have revealed chambers designed to contain human remains, supporting the interpretation that Barnenez was connected to funerary practices. Yet burial alone may not explain its significance. Many of the interior chambers contain carvings etched into the stone. Some depict geometric patterns. Others resemble bows, axes, serpentine shapes, or symbols whose meanings remain uncertain. These markings were clearly intentional, but their purpose remains one of the site's enduring mysteries. Were they religious symbols, territorial markers, representations of myths now forgotten? Or were they part of a symbolic language that modern observers can no longer interpret? The challenge is that Barnenez comes from a period that left very little direct evidence about beliefs, rituals, or social organization. Without written records, archaeology must rely on physical clues. Every chamber, carving, and stone placement provides hints, but the larger picture remains incomplete. The monument's location adds another layer of intrigue. Positioned near the coast, Barnenez overlooks a landscape that would have been deeply important to its builders. Some researchers have suggested that the sea itself may have held spiritual significance. The movement of tides, the changing horizon, and the boundary between land and water often played symbolic roles in ancient belief systems. Could the placement of the monument have reflected such ideas? Some scholars believe the builders intentionally selected locations that connected the worlds of the living and the dead. In this interpretation, Barnenez was not simply a tomb, but a ceremonial landscape designed to mediate between different realms of existence. There is also evidence that certain passageways align with solar events. While not all researchers agree on the extent of these alignments, some chambers appear positioned to interact with sunlight during specific times of the year. If intentional, such alignments would place Barnenez within a broader tradition of prehistoric monuments linked to celestial cycles. This raises fascinating questions. How much astronomical knowledge did these early communities possess? How carefully did they observe the movements of the sun and stars? And what role did that knowledge play in shaping their spiritual world? As often happens with ancient sites, the gaps in our understanding have encouraged more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers point to the monument's age and sophistication as evidence that prehistoric societies may have been far more organized than traditionally assumed. Others argue that the symbolic carvings preserve fragments of forgotten belief systems whose complexity has yet to be fully appreciated. More dramatic theories occasionally suggest connections to lost civilizations or vanished sources of knowledge. While there is no credible evidence supporting such claims, their persistence reflects something undeniable. Barnenez feels older than history itself. Standing inside one of its narrow stone chambers, surrounded by blocks placed thousands of years ago, it becomes difficult not to feel the weight of time. The builders lived in a world fundamentally different from our own. Their languages are gone. Their names are forgotten. Their stories have vanished. Yet the monument remains. Even the modern rediscovery of Barnenez carries an element of mystery. During the 20th century, portions of the cairn were damaged by quarrying before archaeologists recognized its true significance. Hidden chambers emerged unexpectedly from what many had assumed was merely a hill. It was a reminder that ancient secrets can survive in plain sight for millennia. Today, the structure stands overlooking the sea, much as it has for over 6,000 years. The wind still moves across the peninsula. Sunlight still reaches the chambers. The carved stones still wait in silence. Archaeologists continue to study the monument, uncovering new details about its construction and purpose. Yet the most important questions remain difficult to answer. Why did a prehistoric community devote such extraordinary effort to creating this place? What meanings were encoded into its chambers and carvings? And if Barnenez was intended to preserve a message across generations, is it possible that the monument has succeeded, while the language needed to understand that message has been lost forever? If Barnenez leaves us contemplating a monument built before written history, a place where meaning survives but language has vanished, our next destination presents a different kind of mystery. Here, the stones belong not to a prehistoric tomb, but to an entire city. Its streets can still be traced. Its walls still crown a hilltop. And yet, despite the remarkable survival of its structures, much about the people who built and inhabited it remains frustratingly uncertain. High above the green landscapes of northern Portugal, overlooking rolling valleys and distant mountains, lies Citania de Briteiros. Perched on a granite hill known as Monte de São Romão, the ancient settlement commands an expansive view of the surrounding countryside. From this elevated position, it is easy to understand why generations of people chose to live here. The location offers natural defenses, access to resources, and visibility across the region. Today, the site appears peaceful. Stone foundations spread across the hillside in every direction. Ancient roads wind between the ruins. Defensive walls follow the contours of the terrain, enclosing what was once a thriving community. The sounds of modern life feel distant here. Wind moves through the grass, and sunlight reflects off weathered granite blocks that have remained in place for more than 2,000 years. Yet beneath this tranquility lies one of the most intriguing archaeological sites of the Iberian Peninsula. Citania de Briteiros is generally associated with the Castro culture, a network of fortified settlements that flourished in northwestern Iberia during the Iron Age. Archaeologists believe the site reached its peak between the 2nd century BC and the 1st century AD, a period marked by profound social and political change. This was a world standing at a crossroads. Local traditions, beliefs, and ways of life existed alongside growing influence from the expanding Roman Empire. The people who lived here were neither fully isolated nor entirely absorbed into Roman culture. Instead, they occupied a complex space between continuity and transformation. The settlement itself reflects that complexity. Excavations have revealed hundreds of structures arranged within multiple defensive walls. Circular houses dominate much of the site, although rectangular buildings appear in later phases. Carefully planned streets connect neighborhoods. Drainage systems demonstrate sophisticated engineering. Public spaces suggest organized communal activity. For an Iron Age settlement, the scale is impressive. But the deeper researchers investigate, the more questions emerge. Who exactly were the people who built Citania de Briteiros? Historical sources written by Roman authors describe various tribes inhabiting the region, yet these accounts are often incomplete, biased, or imprecise. Archaeology provides material evidence, but names, identities, and beliefs are far more difficult to reconstruct. The inhabitants left behind their houses, tools, jewelry, and fortifications. What they did not leave behind were detailed explanations of their worldview. As a result, much of their story remains hidden. One of the most famous features of the site is a carved stone structure often referred to as the Pedra Formosa, or beautiful stone. This elaborately decorated slab once formed part of a complex associated with ritual bathing. Similar structures have been discovered at other Castro sites throughout the region. The purpose of these baths remains one of the most debated mysteries in Iron Age Iberian archaeology. Some researchers believe they were connected to purification rituals. Others suggest they played a role in initiation ceremonies, perhaps marking transitions into adulthood or special social status. The narrow entrances, enclosed chambers, and carefully designed layouts create an atmosphere that feels distinctly ceremonial, but no written explanation survives. What experiences unfolded inside these spaces? What meanings did participants attach to them? Were they religious, social, political, or all three at once? The answers remain elusive. The city's defensive walls raise further questions. Several concentric fortifications surround portions of the settlement. On one level, their purpose seems obvious: protection. Yet the scale of construction required enormous labor and coordination. Some archaeologists have suggested that the walls also served symbolic functions, communicating status, identity, and collective strength. If so, the fortifications were more than military structures. They were statements. Statements about belonging, power, and community. The arrival of Roman influence adds another layer of intrigue. Archaeological evidence shows that aspects of Roman culture gradually entered the settlement. Imported goods appeared. Architectural styles evolved. Economic networks expanded. Yet local traditions persisted alongside these changes. If Barnenez leaves us contemplating a monument built before written history, a place where meaning survives but language has vanished, our next destination presents a different kind of mystery. Here, the stones belong not to a prehistoric tomb, but to an entire city. Its streets can still be traced. Its walls still crown a hilltop. And yet, despite the remarkable survival of its structures, much about the people who built and inhabited it remains frustratingly uncertain. High above the green landscapes of northern Portugal, overlooking rolling valleys and distant mountains, lies Citania de Briteiros. Perched on a granite hill known as Monte de São Romão, the ancient settlement commands an expansive view of the surrounding countryside. From this elevated position, it is easy to understand why generations of people chose to live here. The location offers natural defenses, access to resources, and visibility across the region. Today, the site appears peaceful. Stone foundations spread across the hillside in every direction. Ancient roads wind between the ruins. Defensive walls follow the contours of the terrain, enclosing what was once a thriving community. The sounds of modern life feel distant here. Wind moves through the grass, and sunlight reflects off weathered granite blocks that have remained in place for more than 2,000 years. Yet beneath this tranquility lies one of the most intriguing archaeological sites of the Iberian Peninsula. Citania de Briteiros is generally associated with the Castro culture, a network of fortified settlements that flourished in northwestern Iberia during the Iron Age. Archaeologists believe the site reached its peak between the 2nd century BC and the 1st century AD, a period marked by profound social and political change. This was a world standing at a crossroads. Local traditions, beliefs, and ways of life existed alongside growing influence from the expanding Roman Empire. The people who lived here were neither fully isolated nor entirely absorbed into Roman culture. Instead, they occupied a complex space between continuity and transformation. The settlement itself reflects that complexity. Excavations have revealed hundreds of structures arranged within multiple defensive walls. Circular houses dominate much of the site, although rectangular buildings appear in later phases. Carefully planned streets connect neighborhoods. Drainage systems demonstrate sophisticated engineering. Public spaces suggest organized communal activity. For an Iron Age settlement, the scale is impressive. But the deeper researchers investigate, the more questions emerge. Who exactly were the people who built Citania de Briteiros? Historical sources written by Roman authors describe various tribes inhabiting the region, yet these accounts are often incomplete, biased, or imprecise. Archaeology provides material evidence, but names, identities, and beliefs are far more difficult to reconstruct. The inhabitants left behind their houses, tools, jewelry, and fortifications. What they did not leave behind were detailed explanations of their worldview. As a result, much of their story remains hidden. One of the most famous features of the site is a carved stone structure often referred to as the Pedra Formosa, or beautiful stone. This elaborately decorated slab once formed part of a complex associated with ritual bathing. Similar structures have been discovered at other Castro sites throughout the region. The purpose of these baths remains one of the most debated mysteries in Iron Age Iberian archaeology. Some researchers believe they were connected to purification rituals. Others suggest they played a role in initiation ceremonies, perhaps marking transitions into adulthood or special social status. The narrow entrances, enclosed chambers, and carefully designed layouts create an atmosphere that feels distinctly ceremonial, but no written explanation survives. What experiences unfolded inside these spaces? What meanings did participants attach to them? Were they religious, social, political, or all three at once? The answers remain elusive. The city's defensive walls raise further questions. Several concentric fortifications surround portions of the settlement. On one level, their purpose seems obvious: protection. Yet the scale of construction required enormous labor and coordination. Some archaeologists have suggested that the walls also served symbolic functions, communicating status, identity, and collective strength. If so, the fortifications were more than military structures. They were statements. Statements about belonging, power, and community. The arrival of Roman influence adds another layer of intrigue. Archaeological evidence shows that aspects of Roman culture gradually entered the settlement. Imported goods appeared. Architectural styles evolved. Economic networks expanded, yet local traditions persisted alongside these changes. If Citania de Briteiros leaves us tracing the outlines of an ancient society caught between tradition and transformation, our journey now moves across the Atlantic and deep into the Andes, where stone cities were not only built on mountains, but carved into them. High above the Urubamba River in southern Peru, where clouds drift through narrow valleys and jagged peaks cut into the sky, lies Ollantaytambo. At first sight, the site feels almost impossible. Enormous terraces rise in perfectly aligned steps along the mountainside, built from massive stone blocks that seem too heavy to have been moved with any conventional method. The landscape itself appears to have been reshaped, as though the mountain was not merely occupied, but carefully redesigned. Even today, the scale is difficult to comprehend. Stone stairways climb steeply between terraces. Ancient walls trace geometric patterns across cliffs. Canals carry water through engineered channels that still function after centuries. Below the terraces, the modern town of Ollantaytambo continues to be inhabited, making it one of the rare places where Inca-era urban planning remains directly integrated into contemporary life. The mainstream historical interpretation places Ollantaytambo firmly within the Inca Empire, flourishing during the 15th century BC. It is widely understood to have been both a ceremonial center and a strategic stronghold. During the Spanish conquest, it became one of the few locations where Inca forces successfully resisted advancing armies, using the terrain and engineered defenses to their advantage. But even with this historical framework, many aspects of Ollantaytambo remain difficult to fully explain. The most striking feature is the precision of its stonework. At the upper terraces, enormous stone blocks, some weighing tens of tons, were transported from quarries located across the river and up steep mountain slopes. The stones were shaped and fitted together with extraordinary accuracy, without the use of mortar. The joints are so tight that even centuries later, it is difficult to insert a blade between them. How was this achieved in such a challenging environment? Conventional explanations point to highly skilled labor, advanced understanding of stone shaping, and coordinated communal effort. The Inca civilization is known for its engineering achievements, including extensive road systems, agricultural terraces, and hydraulic infrastructure. Ollantaytambo fits within this broader tradition of mastery over difficult terrain. Yet the logistical challenges here remain staggering. Transporting multi-ton stones across a river, up steep inclines and into precise alignment, would have required not only manpower, but also sophisticated planning and techniques that are still debated today. Archaeologists continue to experiment with possible methods, including earthen ramps, rope systems, and incremental shaping techniques. Still, no single reconstruction feels entirely complete. The terraces themselves raise additional questions. They are not simply agricultural platforms. Their arrangement suggests both practical and ceremonial functions. Some levels appear optimized for farming, while others seem integrated into architectural and symbolic designs. The way light moves across the terraces at different times of day creates shifting patterns of shadow and illumination that appear intentional. Was this purely functional engineering, or was there a deeper cosmological design at work? The Inca worldview offers some context. Mountains were considered sacred beings, or apis, believed to hold spiritual power and agency. Water, stone, and land were not inert materials but active participants in a living universe. In this framework, constructing a city like Ollantaytambo was not simply a technical achievement. It was an act of harmony between human intention and the natural world. Yet, translating belief into architecture at this scale introduces further mystery. Certain stones at Ollantaytambo appear to have been placed with symbolic orientation. The so-called Temple Hill area contains finely carved structures aligned with distant peaks and celestial events. Some researchers suggest these alignments may correspond to solstices or agricultural cycles, integrating astronomy into the very layout of the city. But interpretations vary. While some alignments are well documented, others remain speculative. The challenge lies in distinguishing intentional design from patterns that emerge naturally in complex landscapes shaped over centuries. Another enduring mystery is the abrupt fragmentation of Inca civilization following the Spanish conquest. Ollantaytambo was one of the last strongholds of organized resistance. After its fall, the broader system of Inca administration collapsed rapidly. Yet the site itself was never fully abandoned. Instead, it transitioned into a smaller settlement, its monumental structures gradually repurposed over time. Some researchers emphasize purely practical explanations, a highly organized society capable of remarkable engineering. Others suggest that Inca architecture encoded deeper symbolic or astronomical knowledge, only partially understood today. A few more speculative theories propose that certain construction techniques may reflect lost methods of material manipulation that have not been fully reconstructed. These ideas remain controversial and are not supported by direct evidence, yet they persist in discussions surrounding sites like Ollantaytambo because the precision and scale of the construction continue to challenge easy explanation. Even the mountain itself seems to participate in the mystery. Ollantaytambo is not built on a mountain so much as it is built into one. The natural rock formations appear integrated into the architecture, as though the builders intentionally collaborated with the landscape rather than reshaping it entirely. Some structures seem to emerge organically from stone outcrops, blurring the boundary between natural and constructed forms. Was this an aesthetic choice, a spiritual one, or a combination of both? The deeper one observes the site, the more it resists simple classification. It is a fortress, yet also a temple. It is a city, yet also a landscape. It is engineered with precision, yet also appears shaped by forces beyond purely functional logic. These overlapping identities make Ollantaytambo difficult to define within modern categories. Today, visitors walk through its narrow streets, climb its terraces, and stand before walls that have endured for centuries. The same stone surfaces that once reflected the intensity of Inca resistance now sit quietly under shifting Andean light. Rivers still flow, winds still move through the valley. The mountains still stand as they did when the first stones were placed. And yet the people who shaped this place are gone. Their intentions remain partially visible in stone, but their explanations have not survived. Archaeology can map the structure, analyze the materials, and reconstruct probable functions, but it cannot fully recover meaning. So the mystery remains suspended in the landscape itself, Was Ollantaytambo primarily a military fortress designed for defense, a sacred ceremonial complex aligned with cosmic forces, or a multifunctional city whose deeper significance is still only partially understood? And if so much of its knowledge was encoded in stone and landscape rather than text, how much of its original purpose might still be waiting, silent and buried within the mountains of the Andes, for us to recognize what we have been looking at all along? If Ollantaytambo leaves us questioning how entire landscapes can be reshaped to reflect both power and belief, our journey now moves far across the world once again, into one of the most extreme environments ever inhabited by ancient civilization. Here, in the heart of the Gobi Desert's eastern edge, history itself seems to dissolve into wind, sand, and silence. Amid the vast emptiness of the Turpan Basin in northwestern China lie the Gaochang Ruins. From a distance, they appear as a pale, crumbling outline against the desert floor, walls eroded by centuries of heat and shifting dunes. But as one approaches, the outlines sharpen into something far more complex, the remains of a once thriving walled city, now reduced to fractured earth-toned geometry stretching across the landscape. The silence here is absolute. No rivers flow nearby. No forests break the horizon. Only wind moves across the ruins, carrying grains of sand through collapsed corridors and open gateways that once marked the entrances to a bustling urban center. Yet Gaochang was not always desolate. Historical records place its origins as early as the first millennium BC, with its most significant development occurring during the Han Dynasty and later periods when it became a vital stop along the Silk Road. Merchants, monks, diplomats, and travelers once passed through its gates, linking east and west in a vast network of trade and cultural exchange. For centuries, Gaochang functioned as a strategic hub. Its position in the Turpan Basin made it both valuable and vulnerable. The city controlled access to important trade routes connecting China with Central Asia and beyond. Caravans carrying silk, spices, precious metals, and ideas passed through its fortified walls. Religious traditions also moved through the city, including Buddhism, Manichaeism, and other belief systems that left traces in the archaeological record. And yet, despite its importance, Gaochang was abandoned. The reasons are not fully clear. Some historical accounts suggest political instability played a role. The region changed hands multiple times, with different kingdoms and empires exerting control over the oasis towns of the Silk Road. Others point to environmental pressures. The Turpan Basin is one of the hottest and driest places on Earth, and changes in water management or climate could have gradually made sustained habitation more difficult. But no single explanation fully captures the scale of abandonment. Walking through the ruins today, one encounters the remains of a carefully planned urban system. Streets are still visible. Residential quarters can still be traced. Temples, administrative buildings, and defensive structures form a faint but coherent map of a city that once supported thousands of people. What happened to them? One of the most striking features of Gaochang is its fortification system. Massive earthen walls once enclosed the city, forming a rectangular boundary that protected its inhabitants from external threats. Even now, sections of these walls still stand, rising abruptly from the desert like skeletal remains of an ancient giant. The construction techniques reveal advanced knowledge of rammed earth architecture, a method well suited to arid environments. But defenses alone do not explain everything. Inside the city, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of cultural and religious diversity. Temples and inscriptions indicate that Gaochang was not dominated by a single tradition. Instead, it appears to have been a place of coexistence, where different belief systems existed side by side, sometimes blending, sometimes remaining distinct. How did such diversity function in practice? And what tensions, if any, emerged from it? The archaeological record does not provide clear answers. Among the most intriguing discoveries are fragments of manuscripts and religious texts preserved in nearby cave complexes, particularly in the broader Turpan region. These documents reveal a multilingual, multicultural world in which ideas traveled as freely as goods. Yet they also hint at periods of disruption and transformation that may have affected cities like Gaochang. Over time, the city's importance declined. By the late medieval period, Gaochang was largely abandoned. Later settlements in the region shifted elsewhere, and the once vibrant urban center slowly became engulfed by the desert. Sandstorms buried structures, walls eroded, roofs collapsed. What had been a thriving city gradually transformed into an archaeological site. But the transition raises further questions. Was the abandonment gradual or sudden? Did residents leave in stages, or was there a more abrupt collapse of the systems that sustained the city? And why did some Silk Road cities survive while others faded into silence? Some researchers suggest that changes in trade routes may have played a crucial role. As political powers shifted and new economic centers emerged, the flow of commerce could have bypassed Gaochang entirely. Without trade, cities in harsh environments often struggled to survive. Others emphasize environmental stress. The Turpan Basin depends on carefully managed water systems, including underground channels that distribute meltwater from surrounding mountains. If these systems were damaged, neglected, or overwhelmed, the city's survival would have become increasingly difficult. Yet even these explanations leave gaps. Gaochang was not a small settlement. It was a major administrative and cultural center. Its infrastructure suggests long-term planning and significant investment. Why, then, was it not restored or reoccupied in a sustained way? This uncertainty has allowed more speculative interpretations to emerge. Some independent researchers argue that Silk Road cities like Gaochang may have been more interconnected than currently understood, forming part of broader networks whose collapse had cascading effects across multiple regions. Others focus on archaeological anomalies in construction phases, suggesting that parts of the city may have been rebuilt or restructured in ways that remain difficult to fully interpret. There are also broader philosophical interpretations. In many ancient cultures, cities were not permanent in the modern sense. They rose, transformed, and disappeared in cycles tied to political authority, environmental conditions, and cultural change. From this perspective, Gaochang's abandonment may not represent failure, but transition. Still, the physical remains evoke something more unsettling. The sheer scale of the ruins suggests a place that was once fully alive, filled with movement, sound, and human presence. Now, only wind passes through its empty corridors. Doorways lead nowhere. Walls cast shadows on sand that slowly reclaims everything. And yet the structure remains intelligible. One can still read the outline of the city. One can still imagine its streets filled with merchants speaking different languages, monks traveling between temples, officials managing trade, and families living their daily lives under the desert sun. That contrast between clarity and absence is what makes Gaochang so compelling. It is not a ruin that has been erased. It is a ruin that has been preserved just enough to remind us of what is missing. Perhaps Gaochang was simply another Silk Road city shaped by the rise and fall of trade networks, political change, and environmental pressure. Or perhaps its decline reflects a more complex interaction of forces that we are only beginning to understand. And as the desert continues its slow work of covering and revealing the past, one question remains suspended over the empty streets. How many more cities like Gaochang once existed along forgotten routes of history, now buried not only in sand, but in the gaps of our own understanding? If Gaochang leaves us standing among the remnants of a Silk Road city slowly reclaimed by the desert, then our next journey takes us across continents once again, this time into a landscape shaped not by wind and sand, but by heat, silence, and an equally persistent sense of abandonment. In the vast Sonoran desert of what is now the southwestern United States, The land stretches outward in muted tones of ochre and stone. Sparse vegetation breaks the horizon. The air shimmers under relentless sunlight. And rising from this seemingly empty expanse stands one of the most enigmatic architectural remnants in North America, the Casa Grande ruins. At first, the structure appears almost solitary, as though placed deliberately in the middle of nowhere and then forgotten. A massive earthen building rises from the desert floor, its walls thick and weathered, its surfaces marked by centuries of erosion. The structure is partially roofed by a modern protective shelter, but its core remains exposed to the elements. Cracks run through the adobe. The color of the walls shifts subtly with the changing light, from pale earth tones in the morning to deep, shadowed browns at dusk. This is Casa Grande, or Great House, the central structure of a larger ancient settlement associated with the Hohokam culture. The Hohokam people lived in this region for centuries, roughly between AD 300 and 1450. They developed one of the most sophisticated irrigation systems in prehistoric North America, transforming an arid desert into productive agricultural land. Canals stretching for miles diverted water from rivers to fields, supporting a thriving network of communities. Casa Grande is believed to have been constructed around the 14th century AD, during the later phase of Hohokam occupation. And yet, despite the sophistication of the society that built it, many aspects of the structure and the civilization itself remain uncertain. The most striking feature of Casa Grande is its scale and purpose. It is a multi-story adobe structure, one of the largest prehistoric buildings ever constructed in what is now the United States. The walls are remarkably thick, built from caliche soil mixed with water and compacted into durable layers. The engineering required to construct such a building in a desert environment suggests careful planning and a deep understanding of local materials. But what was its purpose? That question remains open. Archaeologists generally agree that Casa Grande likely served a ceremonial or administrative function. Its design includes carefully aligned openings and interior spaces that may have been used for observation, ritual activity, or community gatherings. Some studies suggest that certain openings in the structure align with solar events, particularly the position of the sun during solstices. If intentional, these alignments would indicate a sophisticated understanding of astronomy. Yet interpretation remains cautious. Unlike later cultures in the region, the Hohokam left no written records explaining the meaning of this structure. Everything known about Casa Grande comes from archaeology, oral traditions of descendant communities, and comparative analysis of similar sites. And even these sources leave gaps. One of the enduring mysteries is why such a large and complex structure was built in this specific location. The surrounding settlement, now largely invisible beneath the desert surface, once included homes, canals, and agricultural fields. But Casa Grande itself stands apart, larger, more formal, and architecturally distinct. Why emphasize this one building so prominently? Was it a political center, a ceremonial space, a landmark for navigation or seasonal observation? Or did it serve multiple roles simultaneously, blending practical and symbolic functions in ways that modern categories struggle to separate? The desert offers no answers. Over time, the Hohokam civilization underwent significant transformation. Around the 15th century AD, many of their major settlements were abandoned. The canal systems fell into disrepair. Communities dispersed or reorganized into smaller groups. The reasons for this shift remain a subject of ongoing study. Climate change is often cited as a contributing factor. Extended droughts could have disrupted irrigation systems that were essential for survival. Environmental stress, combined with social or political changes, may have gradually made large-scale settlements unsustainable. But like many ancient transitions, the process is not fully understood. Was it a slow decline, or a more abrupt reorganization of society? Casa Grande itself appears to have been abandoned well before European contact, left standing as a silent monument in the desert long after its builders were gone. When later indigenous groups and early explorers encountered the structure, it had already become a place of curiosity and speculation. Some traditions preserved among descendant communities refer to the site with respect, though interpretations vary. Oral histories often emphasize continuity of cultural memory rather than specific architectural explanations. The meaning of Casa Grande in this sense is not fixed. It shifts depending on perspective, time, and cultural context. This ambiguity has contributed to a long history of external speculation. Early observers, unfamiliar with the Hohokam and their achievements, sometimes proposed that the structure must have been influenced or constructed by distant civilizations. Others viewed it through the lens of mystery, unable to reconcile its sophistication with preconceived ideas about the region's past. Modern archaeology has firmly established local origins for Casa Grande and the surrounding Hohokam culture. Yet even with this clarity, deeper questions remain unresolved. How did a society so well adapted to one of the harshest environments in North America develop such advanced engineering and agricultural systems? What knowledge guided the construction of their canal networks, which required precise gradients and long-term maintenance? And how did social organization support such coordinated effort across generations? The structure itself seems to invite these questions. Standing within its shadow today, one can still trace the outlines of ancient windows and interior spaces. Light passes through openings that once framed sky, land, and perhaps astronomical events. The walls, though eroded, still carry the impression of deliberate design. And yet, much of its original context has been lost. We do not know the specific ceremonies that may have taken place within its rooms. We do not know the identities of those who built it, or how knowledge was passed between generations. We do not know what names they gave to this place, or what stories they told about it. All that remains is the structure itself, and the landscape that surrounds it. The desert has a way of preserving silence. Wind moves across the open plains. Heat distorts the horizon. Shadows shift slowly across the adobe walls. Time, in this place, feels both distant and immediate, as though the past has not disappeared, but simply withdrawn from view. Perhaps Casa Grande was a ceremonial center tied to astronomy and seasonal cycles. Perhaps it was a political or administrative hub within a complex irrigation society. Or perhaps its purpose cannot be contained within a single explanation at all, reflecting instead a worldview in which architecture, environment, and community were deeply interconnected. And as the sun moves across the sky and the structure casts its long shadow over the desert floor, one question remains. What stories were once spoken within these walls that have since been carried away by wind, leaving only stone and silence behind? If Casa Grande leaves us contemplating how entire societies can vanish into silence while their architecture remains, our journey now moves across continents once again, toward a colder, more mountainous frontier where ancient empires once carved their presence into volcanic stone. In eastern Anatolia, near the modern city of Erzincan in present-day Turkey, the land rises into rugged hills and wind-swept plateaus. Snow lingers on distant peaks for much of the year. Rivers cut through deep valleys, feeding fertile pockets of land surrounded by harsh highlands. It is here, on a naturally elevated ridge overlooking the Euphrates basin, that the Altıntepe Fortress stands, an ancient citadel whose stones still watch over the landscape in quiet defiance of time. At first approach, the site appears almost like part of the mountain itself. Massive basalt blocks form the remains of defensive walls that once enclosed a fortified settlement. The dark volcanic stone blends into the surrounding terrain, making the ruins difficult to distinguish until one is close enough to see the precision of the construction. Even in their ruined state, the walls suggest strength, order, and careful planning. This was once a Urartian stronghold. The kingdom of Urartu flourished during the early 1st millennium BC, roughly between the 9th and 6th centuries BC, in the region surrounding Lake Van and extending into parts of eastern Anatolia and the South Caucasus. It was a powerful and highly organized state, often in competition with neighboring Assyrian empires. Altıntepe is believed to have been one of its important frontier fortresses, strategically positioned to control movement through the region. From this vantage point, the fortress would have commanded wide views of approaching valleys and mountain passes. Its location alone suggests a carefully chosen military purpose. And yet, as archaeology has revealed more of the site, the picture becomes more complex than simple defense. Inside the fortress walls, excavations have uncovered the remains of temples, storerooms, residential quarters, and burial chambers. The layout suggests that Altıntepe was not only a military installation, but also a ceremonial and administrative center. It was a place where governance, religion, and daily life intersected within a single fortified space. The most striking discovery is the temple complex. Built on a raised platform, the temple structure features carefully cut stone foundations and a layout that reflects the religious practices of the Urartian civilization. Archaeologists have found evidence of ritual activity, including altars and artifacts associated with offerings. The temple appears to have been dedicated to a pantheon of deities tied to nature, warfare, and kingship. But what exactly happened within these sacred spaces remains partially obscured. No written records from Altıntepe itself fully explain the rituals performed here. Urartian inscriptions elsewhere describe religious practices, royal dedications, and military victories, but the specific meaning of this fortress-temple combination is still interpreted through fragments. Why place such an important religious structure inside a heavily fortified military complex? One explanation suggests that the Urartians did not separate sacred authority from political power. Instead, the fortress itself may have represented a unified system in which kings ruled with divine legitimacy, and military strength was inseparable from spiritual authority. In this interpretation, Altıntepe was not just a stronghold, it was a statement, a declaration that power, protection, and belief were part of the same structure, both physically and symbolically embedded in stone. Yet even this explanation leaves unanswered questions. Archaeologists have also discovered elaborate burial chambers within the fortress complex. These tombs contained valuable grave goods, including pottery, weapons, and ornaments. Some burials appear to belong to elite individuals, possibly members of the ruling class or military leadership. Why were high-status burials placed within a fortress rather than separate necropolises, as seen in many other ancient cultures? Was this meant to reinforce ancestral authority over the living community? Or did it reflect a belief that the dead continued to play an active role in protecting the fortress itself? The arrangement of space at Altıntepe suggests layers of meaning that extend beyond purely practical concerns. Storage facilities indicate preparation for long-term occupation. Water systems demonstrate careful engineering. Defensive walls show awareness of military threats. But the integration of sacred, administrative, and funerary spaces suggests a worldview in which these categories were deeply intertwined. The Urartian civilization itself remains partially enigmatic. While inscriptions provide valuable historical information, much of their cultural and symbolic world must be reconstructed indirectly. Their language, written in cuneiform script adapted from Mesopotamian systems, reveals political and religious structure, but not the full depth of lived experience. As a result, sites like Altıntepe become essential windows into their world, yet they are windows with incomplete frames. The fortress also raises broader questions about frontier life in ancient empires. Was Altıntepe primarily a military outpost guarding against external threats, or did it function as a fully integrated community where soldiers, priests, administrators, and families lived together? The archaeological evidence supports elements of both interpretations, but the balance between them remains uncertain. Some researchers suggest that frontier fortresses in the Urartian world may have played a more complex role than previously assumed. Rather than being purely defensive, they may have functioned as centers of cultural integration, projecting imperial authority while also adapting to local conditions. Others focus on the architectural precision of the site itself. The construction techniques used at Altıntepe demonstrate advanced knowledge of stone masonry and urban planning. The alignment of structures, the organization of internal spaces, and the durability of the fortifications all suggest a highly coordinated system of labor and design. Yet even with this sophistication, one question lingers. How much of the original fortress still lies buried beneath the soil, untouched by excavation? Only a portion of the site has been fully explored. Layers of collapse and sediment cover additional structures that may yet reveal further details about life within the fortress. Each excavation season has the potential to reshape our understanding of the site. As with many ancient places, what we see today is only a fragment of what once existed. The winds that move across the Anatolian highlands continue to pass over the ruins, carrying dust through broken walls and empty courtyards. The fortress no longer serves its original purpose, yet its presence remains undeniable. It still dominates the landscape, just as it once dominated movement through the region. Perhaps Altıntepe was primarily a military fortress built to secure a strategic frontier. Perhaps it was also a sacred center where kings reinforced their divine authority. Or perhaps it was something even more integrated, a place where the boundaries between war, worship, governance, and memory were never meant to be separated. And as the stone walls continue to endure through centuries of silence, one question remains suspended in the cold mountain air. What deeper understanding of power and belief did the builders of Altıntepe encode into this fortress that modern archaeology has only begun to uncover? If Altıntepe leaves us with the sense that power, belief, and survival can be fused into a single fortified form carved from stone and mountain, our journey now shifts once more, this time across oceans and into one of the earliest known centers of civilization in the Americas, where monumental architecture emerged in a place that should, by all expectations, have made such development extraordinarily difficult. In the coastal valleys of what is now northern Peru, the landscape appears at first deceptively quiet. Dry hills rise in soft, undulating layers. The air is still, almost weightless. From a distance, there is little to suggest that anything of great historical significance lies here. And yet, as one moves deeper into the Soup Valley, shapes begin to emerge from the earth. Massive earthen platforms, circular sunken plazas, and carefully arranged stone and adobe structures forming the remains of Caral. This is not a ruin of a later empire or a well-known classical civilization. Caral is far older. Archaeological evidence places its development around 2600 BC to 2000 BC, making it one of the oldest known urban centers in the Americas, contemporary with early civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Yet unlike those regions, Caral developed in a coastal desert environment, far from large rivers or naturally fertile plains. That contrast alone raises immediate questions. How does a complex society emerge in a place where environmental conditions seem so restrictive? At the heart of Caral lies a carefully planned urban layout. The city is composed of several large architectural complexes, each containing pyramidal structures, residential areas, and sunken circular plazas. The largest of these structures rises in stepped layers of earth and stone, forming a pyramid that dominates the surrounding valley. From above, Caral appears not as a chaotic settlement, but as a deliberately designed system. Paths connect different sectors of the city. Architectural alignments suggest intentional orientation. Open plazas seem designed for gatherings that may have combined civic, ceremonial, and possibly astronomical functions. The scale of coordination required to build such a site implies a highly organized society with shared purpose and knowledge. Yet one of the most striking aspects of Caral is what is absent. There is no evidence of fortifications. No defensive walls surround the city. No signs of warfare have been clearly identified in its earliest phases. This absence has led some researchers to suggest that Caral may have developed during a relatively stable period, where social organization was not primarily shaped by conflict. But this interpretation is still debated. Why would one of the earliest urban centers in the Americas appear so architecturally focused on ceremony and public gathering rather than defense? The pyramids of Caral are particularly intriguing. Unlike later Mesoamerican pyramids built of stone, Caral's structures are constructed primarily from stone-filled mesh bags and earth, an ingenious technique suited to seismic conditions. These structures were built to withstand earthquakes, a constant reality in the region. The engineering reflects not only architectural ambition, but also a deep understanding of environmental forces. Within some of these pyramids, archaeologists have discovered evidence of ceremonial activity, including offerings, musical instruments, and remains associated with ritual practices. Among the most remarkable finds are flutes made from condor and pelican bones. These instruments suggest that music played a significant role in Caral society. What kinds of ceremonies were accompanied by these sounds? Were they tied to agricultural cycles, astronomical events, or communal gatherings that reinforced social cohesion? No written language has been discovered at Caral. This absence leaves interpretation entirely dependent on material evidence. Without texts, meaning must be reconstructed from spatial organization, artifacts, and architectural patterns. And while these clues are substantial, they do not provide a complete narrative. As a result, Caral remains both highly developed and partially silent. One of the most widely accepted interpretations is that Caral functioned as a regional hub within a network of smaller settlements. Evidence suggests exchange systems involving coastal resources such as fish and shellfish, traded for agricultural products from inland valleys. This interdependence may have supported the rise of urban life in an otherwise challenging environment. Yet even this model raises deeper questions. What kind of social or ideological system allowed such coordination without clear evidence of centralized militarization or coercive control? Some researchers propose that Caral may represent a different model of early civilization, one where integration was achieved through shared ritual systems, economic exchange, and collective participation rather than domination. Others remain cautious, emphasizing that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. The lack of fortifications or clear signs of conflict does not necessarily mean such elements were unimportant or non-existent. The mystery deepens when considering Caral's apparent isolation in time. It represents a very early flowering of complex society in the region, yet it does not appear to have immediate predecessors with similar scale. Nor does it directly evolve into later Andean civilizations in a simple linear progression. Instead, it stands as a powerful but somewhat isolated chapter in the broader story of human development in the Americas. Why did complexity emerge here, at this time, in this form? And why did it eventually decline, leaving behind monumental structures that remained buried under sand and silence for millennia? Environmental change is often considered a contributing factor. Shifts in climate, water availability, or coastal resources could have gradually altered the conditions that sustained Caral's population. Over time, communities may have dispersed, reorganized, or relocated to more favorable regions, but the details remain unclear. Another intriguing aspect is the symbolic function of space within the city. The placement of pyramids, plazas, and residential areas suggests more than practical organization. Some researchers believe that Caral's architecture may encode cosmological principles, reflecting relationships between land, sea, sky, and human activity. If so, then the city itself becomes a kind of three-dimensional expression of worldview, a structure where physical space and meaning are inseparable. Yet without written explanation, these interpretations remain open. Modern visitors walking through Caral encounter a landscape of silence and geometry. The pyramids rise gently from the desert floor, their forms softened by time. Wind moves across empty plazas that once held gatherings, rituals, and daily life. The absence of visible history creates a powerful contrast with the sophistication implied by the structures themselves. Everything suggests organization, intention, and complexity. But the voice of the people who created it has been lost. Perhaps Caral represents an early experiment in urban life shaped by cooperation rather than conquest. Perhaps it reflects a social model that prioritized collective ritual and exchange over hierarchy and warfare. Or perhaps our current understanding captures only fragments of a far more complex reality that has yet to be fully reconstructed. And as the desert slowly reclaims the edges of the ancient city, one question remains open in the stillness. What unseen social and cultural forces allowed one of the earliest civilizations in the Americas to rise here? And what parts of that world still lie buried beneath the sands, waiting to be understood? If Caral leaves us contemplating how urban life can emerge in unexpected environments without clear precedents or simple explanations, our journey now moves to a very different landscape, one where the marks of ancient civilization are not hidden beneath desert sand or mountain stone, but stretched across open fields in quiet alignment with the horizon. In the rolling countryside of North Yorkshire in northern England, the land appears gentle and unassuming. Green pastures extend in wide, undisturbed expanses. Sheep graze where no obvious trace of ancient grandeur can be seen at first glance. And yet, as the eye adjusts to the subtle contours of the terrain, faint circular earthworks begin to emerge, broad, almost ghostly rings carved into the landscape. These are the Thornborough Henges. From above, their form becomes unmistakable. Three massive circular earthworks lie aligned in a straight line across the valley floor, each roughly 240 meters in diameter. Between them stretches a ceremonial landscape that seems deliberately organized, as though the entire valley was once part of a larger, unified design. Even today, their scale is difficult to appreciate from ground level. The henges are not towering monuments, but vast negative spaces, circles defined by ditches and embankments that reshape the land itself. The silence here is different from desert ruins or mountain citadels. It is the silence of continuity. These structures were built during the Neolithic period, roughly between 3500 BC and 2500 BC, making them older than Stonehenge in its most famous phases. They were created by communities who lived during a time of profound transformation, when early agricultural societies were spreading across Britain and reshaping their relationship with the land. Yet despite their age, Thornborough's design suggests intention on a remarkable scale. The three henges are aligned along a northwest to southeast axis, following a straight line that extends across the landscape. This alignment has led many researchers to propose that the entire complex was conceived as a single ceremonial system rather than separate, unrelated structures. Why construct such enormous earthworks in such a precise arrangement? The mainstream interpretation suggests that Thornborough Henges served as a ceremonial and ritual landscape. Like other Neolithic henge sites, they likely hosted gatherings, seasonal festivals, and social or religious ceremonies. The circular form itself is often associated with communal space, areas where boundaries between groups may have been temporarily dissolved during important events. But Thornborough feels unusually large even within that context. Each individual henge required the excavation and movement of vast quantities of earth using only simple tools made of bone, antler, and stone. The labor investment suggests that the site held extraordinary significance for the people who built it. This was not a small village monument. It was a regional project, one that must have involved coordination across multiple communities. And yet, we do not know what exactly those communities believed. One of the most intriguing aspects of Thornborough is its relationship to the surrounding landscape. Archaeological and survey studies have noted that the Henges appear to be positioned in relation to natural features such as rivers, ridges, and possibly even celestial alignments. Some researchers have suggested that the site may have functioned as a kind of ritual map, connecting earth and sky through symbolic geometry. If true, this would place Thornborough within a broader Neolithic tradition in which landscape, astronomy, and ritual practice were deeply interconnected. The circular form itself invites interpretation. Circles in prehistoric architecture are often associated with cycles, of seasons, of life and death, of celestial movement. The repeated use of this shape across Neolithic Europe suggests shared symbolic frameworks, though the exact meanings remain unknown. Were the Henges intended to represent solar or lunar cycles? Did they mark important seasonal transitions tied to agriculture? Or did they function as gathering places where social identity was renewed through ritual performance? No written records survive to confirm any of these possibilities. Adding to the mystery is the so-called processional avenue, thought by some researchers to have connected elements of the Thornborough complex. Although much of this feature is no longer visible, geophysical surveys suggest that pathways or alignments may have guided movement between the Henges. If such routes existed, they would imply that the site was not static, but experiential, designed to be moved through, encountered in sequence, and understood as a journey rather than a single location. What kind of experience might that journey have created for those who participated in it? Modern interpretations vary widely. Some archaeologists emphasize social cohesion, suggesting that sites like Thornborough played a crucial role in maintaining relationships between dispersed Neolithic communities. Large gatherings could have reinforced alliances, exchanged goods, and strengthened shared identities in an otherwise fragmented world. Others explore more symbolic interpretations. The scale and alignment of the Henges have led some researchers to propose that the site may encode cosmological knowledge or reflect an ancient understanding of spatial order that integrated human activity with celestial patterns. While such ideas remain speculative, they reflect a recurring theme in Neolithic archaeology: the possibility that these monuments were not simply functional, but deeply conceptual. There are also debates about how the site evolved over time. Evidence suggests that Thornborough was used for centuries, possibly even millennia, with changes in structure and usage occurring across different phases. Later activity in the surrounding region, including Bronze Age and Iron Age developments, indicates that the landscape retained cultural significance long after the original builders were gone. But continuity does not necessarily mean understanding. Each generation may have inherited the landscape without fully knowing its original meaning, adapting it to new beliefs or social systems. In this sense, Thornborough may represent a kind of cultural palimpsest, where meanings are layered, overwritten, and partially erased over time. Modern threats to the site add another dimension to its mystery. Agricultural activity, quarrying proposals, and land use changes have raised concerns about the preservation of the Henges. Although protected as an important archaeological landscape, the site remains vulnerable to gradual erosion and human impact. The very features that have survived for over 5,000 years continue to exist in a fragile balance with the present. Walking through Thornborough today, one is struck by how subtle the monument has become. There are no towering stones, no visible architecture in the conventional sense. Instead, the monument is defined by absence, by earth removed, by space shaped, by geometry carved into the ground itself. It is a landscape that reveals its meaning only slowly, as patterns emerge from elevation, distance, and perspective. Perhaps this is part of its intention. Perhaps the experience of understanding was meant to unfold gradually, requiring movement, time, and participation. Or perhaps we are projecting meaning onto a structure whose original purpose remains fundamentally unknown. And as the wind moves across the open fields of North Yorkshire, tracing invisible lines between ancient circles in the earth, one question lingers over the landscape. Were the Thornborough Henges designed as a map of the heavens, a stage for human gathering, or a forgotten system of meaning whose full interpretation has yet to be recovered from the deep silence of prehistory? If Thornborough leaves us with the impression that meaning itself can be embedded into landscapes, subtle, expansive, and almost invisible from the ground, then our next site draws us into a very different kind of silence. Here, meaning is not spread across open fields, but concentrated in a desert basin where architecture rises from sand like something half-remembered. In the coastal deserts of southern Peru, far from modern cities and surrounded by vast arid plains, the land appears almost lifeless at first glance. The wind moves freely across dunes and gravel, shaping the surface into shifting patterns that erase as quickly as they form. Yet within this harsh environment lies one of the most enigmatic ceremonial landscapes of the ancient Andes, the Cahuachi Ceremonial Center. From a distance, Cahuachi does not resemble a city in the traditional sense. There are no dense urban blocks, no continuous residential quarters, no clear signs of permanent large-scale habitation. Instead, what emerges from the desert are massive earthen mounds, elongated platforms, and scattered architectural complexes arranged across a wide area. The structures rise gently from the ground, their forms softened by centuries of erosion, blending into the surrounding landscape as though they were never fully separate from it. And yet, despite this subtle appearance, Cahuachi spans an extraordinary scale. It is one of the largest known ceremonial centers of the Nazca culture, which flourished in this region between approximately 100 BC and AD 500. The Nazca are widely known for the mysterious geoglyphs etched into the desert floor, the Nazca lines, but Cahuachi appears to represent a different dimension of their civilization, one focused not on permanent urban life, but on ritual, gathering, and periodic occupation. This distinction is crucial. Archaeological evidence suggests that Cahuachi was not a conventional city inhabited continuously by a dense population. Instead, it appears to have functioned as a pilgrimage center, where people gathered for ceremonies, rituals, and seasonal events, then returned to smaller settlements across the region. But this interpretation raises its own questions. Why construct such an extensive ceremonial complex in a place so inhospitable to sustained habitation? What kind of social system prioritizes monumental ritual architecture over permanent urban infrastructure? The site is composed of more than 40 major mounds and platforms, some of which reach significant heights and span large areas. These structures were built using adobe, sun-dried mud bricks, carefully shaped and layered over time. Within and around them, archaeologists have uncovered ceremonial spaces, burials, offerings, and artifacts associated with ritual activity. Among the most striking discoveries are textiles and ceremonial objects that reflect the artistic and symbolic complexity of the Nazca culture. Intricate patterns, stylized figures, and vivid colors suggest a sophisticated visual language. Many of these designs are thought to have held religious or cosmological meaning, though their exact interpretations remain uncertain. The same symbolic system that appears in pottery and textiles may also be connected to the famous Nazca lines etched across the surrounding desert. Was Cahuachi the ritual heart of this broader symbolic landscape? Some researchers believe so. In this interpretation, the geoglyphs outside the ceremonial center may have functioned as part of a larger pilgrimage system, paths and images that guided movement toward Cahuachi itself. The desert, in this view, becomes not empty space, but an active ceremonial environment extending far beyond the boundaries of the site. Yet this idea remains debated. One of the most intriguing aspects of Cahuachi is its apparent lack of permanent urban infrastructure. There is little evidence of large-scale residential occupation. Instead, the architecture suggests episodic use, structures activated during specific times and then left largely unoccupied. What kind of society builds a ceremonial center of this scale without anchoring it to permanent urban life? Some archaeologists suggest that Cahuachi reflects a highly organized ritual system in which mobility and periodic gathering were central to social cohesion. Communities may have traveled from across the Nazca region to participate in ceremonies tied to agriculture, water cycles, or celestial events. Water, in particular, is a recurring theme in interpretations of Nazca culture. In an environment where water is scarce and unpredictable, control over irrigation and rainfall would have held both practical and symbolic importance. Ritual activity at Cahuachi may have been closely linked to appeals for water, fertility, and environmental balance, but the archaeological record does not provide definitive answers. Instead, it presents a landscape designed for movement and experience. Pathways lead between mounds. Open plazas suggest gathering spaces. Elevated platforms may have served as stages for ritual performance or observation. The entire site appears oriented toward activity that was temporary, cyclical, and deeply tied to timing. Time itself may have been a key element of the site's meaning. Some researchers propose that Cahuachi functioned in alignment with seasonal cycles, astronomical events, or agricultural phases. Ceremonies may have been concentrated at specific moments when environmental conditions demanded communal attention and ritual action. If so, then the site was not meant to be constantly active, but periodically awakened. This idea gives Cahuachi a very different character from typical ancient cities. Instead of permanence, it suggests rhythm. Instead of continuous occupation, it suggests return. Instead of static structure, it suggests a living landscape activated by human presence at specific intervals. Yet even this interpretation leaves gaps. Many of the rituals that likely took place here are no longer visible in the archaeological record. Music, movement, spoken language, and sensory experience rarely leave durable traces. What remains are only fragments: ceramic vessels, textiles, architectural forms, and burial contexts. From these fragments, scholars attempt to reconstruct a world that was once rich with meaning but is now largely silent. And silence, in Cahuachi, is profound. The desert does not preserve sound, only form. Wind moves across the mounds. Shadows shift across adobe surfaces. The structures stand exposed, yet partially absorbed by the landscape that surrounds them. It is a place where human intention and environmental force seem inseparably intertwined. Perhaps Cahuachi was primarily a ceremonial pilgrimage center tied to water, agriculture, and cosmic cycles. Perhaps it was a decentralized ritual landscape that unified dispersed communities through shared experience. Or perhaps it represents a form of social organization that does not easily align with modern categories of city or temple complex at all. And as the desert continues to expand its quiet influence across the site, one question remains suspended in the still air. What ceremonies once filled these empty mounds with meaning so powerful that an entire civilization gathered here again and again, leaving behind only earth, silence, and the faint outline of something we are still trying to understand? If Cahuachi leaves us with the sense of a ceremonial world activated by rhythm, gathering, and seasonal return rather than permanent occupation, then our journey now ascends once more, away from desert basins and lowland valleys, and into one of the most isolated and visually striking highland landscapes in South America. High in the Andes of central Peru, where the air grows thin and the horizon stretches into endless layers of stone and sky, lies the Marcahuasi Plateau. At first approach, it appears as a vast, silent table of rock suspended above the surrounding valleys. The terrain is harsh and weathered, shaped by wind, freeze, and time. Clouds drift low across its surface, sometimes swallowing entire sections of the plateau, leaving only fragments visible, then revealing them again as the mist shifts. But what makes Marcahuasi so compelling is not only its altitude or isolation, it is the shapes. Across the plateau, enormous rock formations rise in strange and sometimes unsettling configurations. From certain angles, they resemble human faces carved into the stone. Elsewhere, silhouettes appear to mimic animals, helmets, seated figures, and architectural forms. Some formations seem so deliberate that early visitors describe them as statues. Others insist they are entirely natural, sculpted over millennia by erosion and weathering. This tension between natural formation and perceived design is at the heart of Marcahuasi's mystery. Geologically, the plateau is composed primarily of volcanic rock subjected to long-term erosion. Wind, temperature fluctuations, and water over vast spans of time can produce remarkable patterns in stone. Geologists often explain the formations here as the result of pareidolia, the human tendency to recognize familiar shapes in random patterns. And yet, standing among the formations, that explanation does not always feel sufficient. Some of the rock formations appear unusually structured. Symmetry emerges in unexpected places. Certain formations seem positioned in ways that suggest intentional arrangement when viewed from specific vantage points. Others align in sequences that resemble processional paths or spatial narratives. Is this coincidence shaped by perception or something more deliberate? Marcahuasi has long been associated with local oral traditions that speak of an ancient, forgotten presence in the region. Some accounts describe the plateau as a sacred space, used for rituals or gatherings long before the arrival of well-documented Andean civilizations. Others speak in more symbolic terms, describing it as a place where the spirit world feels unusually close. There is no definitive archaeological evidence of a large permanent settlement on the plateau itself. Excavations have revealed limited traces of human activity, suggesting that if people used this site, they did so intermittently rather than as a residential center. This absence of clear habitation only deepens the mystery. Why would a location so remote and difficult to access hold significance across generations of local tradition? The mainstream interpretation suggests that Marcahuasi may have functioned as a ritual landscape or a place of symbolic importance rather than a constructed monument. In this view, its meaning is not embedded in human-built architecture, but in the way natural forms were interpreted and incorporated into cultural narratives. The human mind, when confronted with complex stone formations, naturally seeks patterns. Faces emerge in cliff walls. Figures appear in shadows. Entire stories are projected onto landscapes that were never intentionally shaped. But even within this explanation, questions remain. Some researchers have noted that certain formations appear to be clustered in ways that are not easily explained by random geological processes alone. While erosion can create extraordinary shapes, the distribution and grouping of some features at Marcahuasi have led to ongoing debate. Are these clusters meaningful or simply the result of long-term natural variation? Beyond geological interpretation, Marcahuasi has also attracted more speculative theories over time. Some independent researchers propose that the plateau may have been used as an astronomical observation site, with certain formations acting as markers for celestial events. The high elevation and wide horizon make it theoretically suitable for tracking stars, solstices, or seasonal changes. However, no definitive alignment system has been universally accepted by mainstream archaeology. Others suggest that the site may preserve cultural memory encoded in landscape interpretation, where natural formations were not modified physically, but assigned meaning through observation, storytelling, and ritual engagement. In this sense, Marcahuasi would not be a constructed monument, but a reed landscape, where meaning emerges through perception and tradition rather than physical alteration. Still, this idea raises further questions. If meaning is assigned rather than built, how stable is that meaning across generations? And how much of what we see today reflects ancient perception versus modern interpretation? One of the most striking aspects of Marcahuasi is how it changes with light and weather. At sunrise and sunset, shadows lengthen across the plateau, altering the appearance of the rock formations. Faces seem to emerge and disappear. Figures shift subtly as angles of illumination change. What appears static at midday becomes dynamic at dawn or dusk. This fluidity complicates attempts at classification. Is the landscape itself the source of the imagery, or is perception doing the primary work? For many visitors, the experience is less about identifying specific shapes and more about entering a psychological state shaped by scale, silence, and elevation. The plateau's isolation removes familiar reference points. Without vegetation, buildings, or urban markers, the mind becomes more sensitive to irregularities in stone and shadow. This makes interpretation deeply personal. And yet, across different observers and different times, certain patterns recur. The same formations are repeatedly described as faces, guardians, animals, or figures seated in contemplation. Whether this consistency reflects shared perception or shared suggestion remains an open question. Archaeologically, Marcahuasi continues to resist easy categorization. It is neither a clearly constructed monument nor a purely unremarkable geological formation. It occupies a liminal space between natural landscape and cultural meaning. This ambiguity is precisely what makes it so compelling, because here, interpretation becomes part of the site itself. Unlike carved temples or built cities, Marcahuasi does not present a fixed narrative. It offers instead a shifting field of perception, where meaning depends on position, light, and imagination. Perhaps this is why it continues to draw attention across disciplines: archaeology, geology, anthropology, and even philosophy. It forces a fundamental question. Where does meaning begin? In the stone itself? In the human mind? Or in the interaction between the two? Some traditions suggest that the plateau was a sacred space used for vision quests or spiritual encounters, where isolation and altitude created conditions for altered perception. In such contexts, the rock formations may have served as anchors for storytelling or meditation rather than fixed symbolic objects. Others remain more cautious, emphasizing that no conclusive evidence supports ritual construction or ancient engineering at the site. And so the tension remains unresolved. Marcahuasi stands as a place where interpretation cannot fully separate itself from observation. Every visitor brings a different understanding, and every shift in light offers a new arrangement of forms. The plateau does not confirm answers. It generates questions. And as the wind moves across its silent surface, carrying mist between stone formations that resemble something just recognizable but never fully defined, one question lingers over the high Andean horizon. Are we looking at a landscape shaped entirely by natural forces, or at a place where human meaning has been projected so deeply into stone that the boundary between geology and imagination has never been fully restored? If Marcahuasi leaves us questioning whether meaning can be projected so deeply onto stone and landscape that perception itself becomes part of the archaeology, then our journey now turns far north once again, into a place where stone was not imagined into faces or figures, but carefully stacked into a form so deliberate that it still defies simple categorization. On the Isle of Lewis in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, the landscape is shaped by wind, peat, and sea. The Atlantic presses relentlessly against the coastline, and storms sweep across the island with a force that feels almost primordial. In this environment of salt, rain, and isolation stands Dun Carloway, one of the best-preserved Iron Age brochs in Scotland. At first sight, Dun Carloway appears deceptively simple. A tall, circular tower of dry stone construction rises from a low hill overlooking the surrounding moorland and distant sea. Its walls are thick, impossibly thick by modern standards, built from carefully selected stones fitted together without mortar. The structure tapers as it rises, forming a narrowing silhouette against the sky. Even in its ruined state, it conveys a sense of strength and permanence, as though it was built not merely to withstand time, but to define it. Yet Dun Carloway is not an isolated curiosity. It belongs to a broader tradition of brush construction found across northern Scotland and the islands, dating roughly from the late Iron Age, around 200 BC to AD 400. These structures remain among the most enigmatic architectural forms in prehistoric Europe. Their purpose, their social context, and even their full construction methods continue to be debated. Bruks are unique. They are neither simple dwellings nor straightforward fortresses. Instead, they combine features of both, along with architectural elements that do not easily fit modern categories. Dun Carloway, like others of its kind, consists of a central hollow tower surrounded by internal galleries, stairways, and chambers built into the thickness of its walls. Inside, the structure feels almost labyrinthine. Narrow passages wind upward between stone layers. Small chambers open unexpectedly within the walls themselves. The design suggests careful planning and an understanding of structural stability that is remarkable for its time. Yet despite extensive study, there is no complete consensus on how bruks functioned in daily life. Were they defensive structures designed to protect against raids or conflict? Were they elite residences symbolizing social status and control over land? Or did they serve multiple overlapping purposes, shifting roles depending on circumstance and need? Dun Carloway does not provide a clear answer. What it does offer is evidence of extraordinary labor and coordination. The construction of a bruk required the careful selection and placement of thousands of stones, shaped and balanced to form stable circular walls that could rise to significant heights. Even today, without modern tools, replicating such structures would be a significant engineering challenge. And yet, the people who built Dun Carloway did so without written plans, without modern machinery, and without the benefit of later architectural theory. They worked with stone, memory, and tradition. The location of Dun Carloway adds another layer of complexity to its interpretation. Perched on a hill overlooking Loch Carloway and the surrounding landscape, the brooch commands a wide field of vision. From this vantage point, movement across the land and water could be observed clearly. This has led many researchers to interpret bruks as defensive sites, strategically placed to monitor territory and respond to potential threats. But this explanation may not be sufficient on its own. Not all bruks show clear evidence of conflict or destruction. Some appear to have been long-term habitation sites, while others show signs of reuse or modification over time. Dun Carloway itself bears traces of later occupation and structural change, suggesting that its function may have evolved across centuries. This raises an important question. Were bruks designed for a single purpose, or were they flexible structures embedded in shifting social systems? The Iron Age societies of northern Scotland did not leave written records, which means that interpretation must rely entirely on material remains. Pottery, animal bones, structural patterns, and landscape placement all contribute to modern understanding, but none provide direct explanation. As a result, bruks occupy a space of interpretive uncertainty. Some archaeologists emphasize the defensive hypothesis, pointing to thick walls, elevated positions, and limited entry points. Others argue for a more symbolic or social interpretation, suggesting that bruks may have represented power, lineage, or communal identity rather than purely military function. In this view, Dun Carloway may have been less a fortress and more a statement. a statement about belonging, resilience, and control over a harsh and demanding landscape. The environmental context of the Outer Hebrides reinforces this idea. Life in this region during the Iron Age would have been shaped by wind, salt, limited agricultural land, and seasonal unpredictability. In such conditions, strong communal organization would have been essential. Structures like Dun Carloway may have functioned as centers of coordination, gathering and storage as much as defense. Inside the broch, archaeologists have found evidence of hearths, animal remains, and domestic activity. These suggest that people lived within or around the structure for extended periods. Yet the internal layout, with its narrow passages and elevated galleries, does not resemble typical domestic architecture in a straightforward way. Why build a home like this? Or perhaps more accurately, what kind of society considers such a structure to be a home? One of the most intriguing aspects of Dun Carloway is how it interacts with the landscape. From the surrounding moor, the broch appears as a solitary vertical form rising from low ground. It does not dominate the landscape in the way of later castles, but instead blends into it, using local stone that mirrors the colors and textures of the terrain. In some light conditions, it becomes almost indistinguishable from the hill itself. This relationship between structure and environment may be significant. Rather than imposing dominance over the landscape, brochs may have been designed to integrate with it. Their circular form echoes natural shapes found in hills, lochs, and stone formations. Their materials come directly from the surrounding earth. Their visibility changes depending on weather, light, and distance. In this sense, Dun Carloway is both presence and absence. It appears and disappears depending on perspective. Over time, the broch fell out of use, likely as social and political structures in northern Scotland changed during the early medieval period. Stones may have been removed for other buildings. Roof structures, if they ever existed in a substantial form, would have collapsed long ago. Yet the core remains intact enough to convey its original form. It still stands, not as a ruin of sudden destruction, but as a structure that slowly transitioned out of its original world. Modern excavations and studies have provided valuable insights into broch construction techniques, but many fundamental questions remain unresolved. How widespread was shared architectural knowledge across Iron Age Scotland? Were brochs built by a single cultural group, or do they represent a broader regional tradition with local variations? And perhaps most importantly, what social conditions made such a distinctive architectural form both necessary and meaningful? Some researchers propose that brochs like Dun Carloway may represent a uniquely insular development, an architectural response to the specific environmental and social pressures of the Scottish North. Others suggest broader connections across Atlantic Europe, though clear evidence of direct architectural parallels remains limited. Speculative interpretations occasionally go further, suggesting symbolic or ritual dimensions to broch architecture that are difficult to verify archaeologically. These ideas often focus on the circular form, internal spatial complexity, and elevated positioning as indicators of ceremonial or cosmological significance. However, such interpretations remain highly debated and are not widely accepted as primary explanations. What remains undeniable is the skill involved. Dun Carloway reflects a deep understanding of stone construction, spatial organization, and environmental adaptation. Its builders created a structure capable of enduring centuries of wind, rain, and abandonment. Even in partial ruin, it maintains coherence, a kind of architectural memory preserved in stone. Standing within its walls today, one experiences a sense of enclosure and openness at the same time. The interior feels protected yet exposed to sky and weather. Light filters through gaps in the stonework, shifting as clouds move overhead. The sound of wind passing through the structure becomes part of its atmosphere. And in that atmosphere, interpretation becomes uncertain again. Was Dun Carloway primarily a defensive refuge in a fragmented Iron Age landscape? Was it a symbol of lineage and authority anchored in a specific clan or community? Or was it part of a broader architectural tradition whose full meaning has been partially lost, surviving now only in stone and spatial form? Perhaps it was all of these things at once. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something that cannot be fully reconstructed from the fragments that remain. And as the Atlantic winds continue to move across the Isle of Lewis, circling the ancient stone walls of Dun Carloway, one question lingers in the shifting light and weather. What kind of world builds Stru? If Dun Carloway leaves us with the impression that architecture can embody endurance itself, stone shaped into both shelter and symbol, standing against centuries of wind and silence, then our journey now moves far beyond the Atlantic edges of Europe, into the rugged highlands of the South Caucasus, where another ancient site rises from a landscape shaped by volcano, stone, and deep geological time. In southern Armenia, near the town of Sisian, the land opens into a wide, windswept plateau surrounded by distant mountain ranges. The air here is thin and dry, carrying the scent of rock and grass. The terrain is uneven, scattered with basalt formations shaped by ancient volcanic activity. And within this stark, almost lunar environment lies Carahunge, also known as Zorat's Karar, a site that has sparked debate, curiosity, and controversy for decades. At first glance, Carahunge appears deceptively simple. Hundreds of standing stones emerge from the earth, arranged in irregular but deliberate patterns across the plateau. Some stones are tall and upright, others shorter and partially buried. Many contain small circular holes drilled through their upper sections, a feature that immediately distinguishes Carahunge from more familiar megalithic sites around the world. From a distance, the site resembles a field of silent sentinels. The stones do not form a single obvious shape like a circle or enclosure. Instead, they stretch across the landscape in branching lines and clusters, as though marking pathways, boundaries, or alignments whose logic is not immediately visible from ground level. And yet, the precision of certain elements suggests intention. Carahunge has often been compared, carefully and controversially, to other prehistoric stone arrangements, particularly those associated with astronomical observation. Some researchers have proposed that it may date back to the late Bronze Age or early Iron Age, roughly between 2000 BC and 1000 BC, although precise dating remains difficult due to limited excavation and the complex geological history of the region. The central question is not simply when Carahunge was built, but why. One of the most discussed features of the site is the presence of those perforated stones. The small holes, worn and weathered over time, appear in a number of standing stones oriented in different directions. Some alignments suggest possible relationships with solar or stellar positions, though interpretations vary widely among researchers. Are these openings purely structural or symbolic, or could they have been used for observation? Mainstream archaeology tends to approach Carahunge with caution. While acknowledging its antiquity and cultural significance, many scholars argue that the astronomical interpretation is not conclusively supported by evidence. Erosion, later disturbances, and natural stone movement over millennia complicate any attempt to reconstruct original alignments with certainty. Yet the idea persists. Part of this persistence comes from the way the stones interact with the horizon. At certain points across the site, lines of stones appear to point toward distant mountain peaks or specific sections of the sky when viewed from ground level. During sunrise or sunset, light moves across the plateau in ways that accentuate these alignments, casting long shadows that connect stones visually across space. Is this intentional design, or the result of human pattern recognition applied to natural variation? This question lies at the center of Carahunge's mystery. Local traditions and interpretations add further depth. Some narratives describe the site as an ancient observatory, where early inhabitants tracked celestial movements and seasonal cycles using the stones as markers. In these accounts, Carahunge is not merely a collection of standing stones, but a sophisticated system for observing the heavens. Other interpretations frame it differently. Some suggest that the site may have had ritual or funerary significance, with stones marking sacred spaces, ancestral memory points, or territorial boundaries. In this view, the holes in the stones may not have served observational purposes at all, but instead symbolic or functional roles now lost to time. The truth may lie somewhere between these possibilities, or outside them entirely. One of the challenges in interpreting Carahunge is the lack of clear contextual artifacts. Unlike excavated settlements or burial sites with associated material culture, Carahunge offers limited direct evidence of daily life. There are no clearly defined habitation layers, no extensive tool assemblages, and no inscriptions that definitively explain its purpose. What remains is form without explicit narrative.
And form in archaeology is always open to interpretation. Some researchers argue that Carahunge should be understood within a broader regional tradition of megalithic construction. Across the Caucasus and surrounding regions, ancient communities erected stone structures that may have served a variety of social, ritual, and practical functions. Carahunge could represent one expression of this broader cultural pattern, adapted to local geography and belief systems. Others propose a more specialized function. The astronomical hypothesis, while debated, remains one of the most persistent interpretations. Proponents suggest that the arrangement of stones may encode knowledge of celestial cycles, allowing ancient observers to track solstices, equinoxes, or stellar movements critical for agricultural or ritual timing. However, critics caution that such alignments can often emerge naturally in complex stone fields, especially when viewed selectively from certain positions. The human tendency to identify patterns, particularly in ancient and enigmatic structures, can sometimes lead to overinterpretation. This tension between pattern and randomness is central to Carahunge's enduring ambiguity. Standing among the stones today, one experiences a striking sense of openness. Unlike enclosed temples or fortified structures, Carahunge does not define clear boundaries between interior and exterior space. Instead, it dissolves those boundaries entirely. The sky above, the mountains in the distance, and the stones themselves form a continuous field of perception. This openness invites contemplation rather than certainty. The site does not dictate interpretation, it allows it. Weather conditions further transform its appearance. In bright sunlight, the basalt stones cast sharp, defined shadows. Under cloud cover, they blend into the muted tones of the plateau. In mist or snow, they become partially obscured as though receding into another layer of time. Each condition alters perception, making the site feel different each time it is encountered. This variability complicates attempts to assign fixed meaning. If Carahunge was an observatory, its design would imply a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and spatial geometry. If it was a ritual site, it would suggest a symbolic system deeply connected to landscape and sky. If it served multiple functions over time, then its meaning may have evolved, accumulating layers rather than a single purpose. But without definitive inscriptions or uncontested archaeological consensus, each interpretation remains provisional, and perhaps that is part of its nature. Carahunge resists closure. Even its name reflects layers of interpretation. Zorat's Kara, often translated as stone army, evokes imagery of standing figures aligned in formation, while Carahunge has been popularly associated with interpretations linking it to sound or resonance, though linguistic debates continue over the accuracy of such claims. These differing names themselves reflect how meaning is constructed over time, not only through archaeology, but through language, tradition, and modern reinterpretation. The stones themselves remain silent. Yet silence in archaeology is never empty. It is filled with the assumptions, questions, and frameworks that we bring to it. As researchers continue to study Carahunge, New technologies such as satellite imaging, 3D mapping, and astronomical modeling offer additional tools for analysis. These methods may eventually clarify aspects of alignment, structure, and chronology, but even advanced tools cannot fully resolve questions of meaning or intention. Those remain interpretive, and interpretation by its nature is never final. Walking across the plateau today, one moves between stones that have stood for thousands of years. Some are weathered, almost smooth, others still retain sharp edges. The holes in certain stones look outward in different directions, as though observing something just beyond human perception. The wind passes through them without resistance. Time passes through them as well. Perhaps Carahunge was an observatory, carefully aligned to the movements of the sky. Perhaps it was a sacred landscape shaped by ritual practice and symbolic geography. Or perhaps it represents something even more complex, a site where multiple functions, meanings, and generations overlap in ways that cannot be fully separated today. And as the sun moves across the Armenian plateau, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow through the ancient stones, one question remains suspended in the highland air. Are we looking at the remnants of a sophisticated ancient system for understanding the cosmos? Or at a landscape whose meaning has become so layered over time that only fragments of its original intention still remain visible to us?